Credo che dobbiamo cominciare. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Buon pomeriggio a tutti e benvenuti. This is not the first time that the Foundation has a focus on Africa. And we like to address the issue of Africa because we think it is a continent of the future, well represented by a fashionable slogan of some time ago, Rising Africa, you remember that. This time we have a focus on the Horn of Africa, a region of strategic importance on various accounts for countries struggling to find an harmonic and stable dimension, and Addis Ababa is the chair of the African Union, adding an international dimension which is very significant. The Horn of Africa today has also a maritime aspect. We not always think about that. Due to the Red Sea, the Strait of el-Mandeb, the Indian Ocean, where problems of trade and energy are linked with issues of security since the times of the Cold War. They affect the European Union, NATO, the United Nations, and the international community in general. The Horn of Africa is also a region of interest to Italy for historic reasons, but also for important relations and investments. I am thinking, but not only, of Somalia, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, with whom different European countries share a complex past until recently. I also recall the very significant dam that has been built in Ethiopia and represents at the same time a game changer for the country in economic terms and a strategic issue for some countries. In conclusion, the Horn of Africa is more relevant than ever for international security, where we see at the same time maritime connectivity, energy resilience, competition for influence of different actors, internal fragmentation versus international cooperation. There are so many different aspects, and complexity is really the name of the game. We see very unfortunate things developing, like the sad civil war in Sudan today. We have asked the Specialized African Unit to provide an initial research on artificial intelligence. Why? Because the idea is that it could be used as a methodology to address crisis prevention and management in the future. The interesting study that we have asked examines crisis dynamics, possible avenues for preventive diplomacy, and early warning indicators. We have organized today a workshop to study the future implication of those factors, exchanging perspectives on the challenges that are shaping the region. We have been able to have here a large number of high-level speakers and moderators coming from different angles in order to offer presentations that represent a vast spectrum of points of view and experiences. As usual, the Foundation has the ambition to promote a conversation that is scientific, high-level, respectful of different views. We hope that we can figure out some common indicators of a reasonable direction to promote stability and to support the countries of the region. Finally, I wish to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the support, friends who have encouraged us, the Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, la Fondazione CSF, the NATO Defense College, of course, and many thanks go also to our media partners, Africa Confidential, Africa Express, and the usual at the end, Kronos. And a warm thank to the staff, my staff, for their enthusiasm and their hard work, despite complications of various kinds. So, buon pomeriggio a tutti e buon lavoro.
Buongiorno a tutti. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to represent the NATO Defense College today, as this conference dedicated to such a strategic topic as the Horn of Africa. First, I would like to warmly thanks to NATO Defense Foundation for organizing this event, for bringing together such distinguished panel of experts. The Horn of Africa has always been a crossroad between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as between Africa, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. Today, it has become one of the world's most strategic regions. The Horn of Africa lies next to one of the world's most important maritime passages. Recent events, the conflict in the Middle East, the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, and the resurgence of piracy off the coast of Somalia have once again reminded us how development in this region have a direct impact on our collective security and our supply lines. Yet, the region continues to face many challenges. Terrorism remains a persistent threat. Tensions between states and within society continue to fuel instability. Humanitarian crises are worsening as a result of conflict, climate change, and food insecurity. In addition to these traditional challenges, the region is now facing hybrid threats as well as growing attempts by both state and non-state actors to expand their influence, particularly Russia and China, which continue to strengthen their presence in the region. The context I have just described is well known of all of us, yet many fundamental questions remain. For example, how we can protect this region from destabilizing influence of our strategic competitors, how we can support the emergence and regional hub center of Ethiopia, a key actor of Horn Africa, will encourage a cooperative rather than hegemonic regional vision. And perhaps above all, how can we help reconcile communities that continue to pay the price of conflict, poor governance, and political fragmentation? These are just some of many questions. There are many more that we must address together. In an interconnected world, the strategic importance of the Horn of Africa must be regarded as an integral part of Euro-Atlantic security. Since 2005, at the request of the African Union, NATO has been engaged in the region and has steadily strengthened its cooperation, particularly with the African Union. Today, more than ever, this region deserves our collective attention. This is precisely why we are today, to reflect on our preventive diplomacy, strategic foresight, and stronger cooperation between the African Union, the European Union, and regional partners can help prevent crises, strengthen regional resilience, and promote African solutions to African challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, the Horn of Africa is not simply a region that we must observe. It's a region with which we must build lasting partnerships. Preserving its stability is shared responsibility and essential invest in our common Euro-Atlantic security. I am confident that today's discussion will deepen our understanding on this vital region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Distinguished guests, good evening, buon pomeriggio. It is a great pleasure to welcome you also from my side to this high-level workshop dedicated to one of the most strategically relevant regions in the Euro-Atlantic security, as it has been already mentioned, the Horn of Africa. I'm particularly pleased to do so as my capacity of a counselor of Fondazione CSF, who has the privilege of serving as a scientific advisor of Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo and of supporting this initiative alongside the NATO Defense College Foundation, the NATO Defense College, and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Fondazione CSF has been long committed to promoting research and also policy dialogue on international affairs, European integration, global security. And we believe that today's complex challenges require multidisciplinary analysis and also sustained cooperation between institutions, academia, and practitioners. And it is precisely in this spirit that we have enthusiastically contributed to this workshop. Speakers before me have already addressed the centrality of the Horn of Africa in terms of its geopolitical position, and we know now that developments in this region are no longer confined in the immediate neighborhood, but they have direct implications for European security, global trade, energy supplies, and the resilience of international connectivity. And in particular, when we talk about the maritime corridors that go through this region, we have learned through recent crises how vulnerable these routes can be to geopolitical tensions, but also hybrid activities and regional instability, with immediate consequences that extend well beyond the region itself. At the same time, there are security challenges in the region that have become increasingly interconnected. These challenges have been already mentioned. These create a very complex security environment that requires integrated responses rather than isolated initiatives. Addressing these challenges calls for stronger partnerships. We heard that NATO has progressively reinforced its engagement in the southern neighborhood, while the European Union continues to play a very important role through its security, maritime, and also capacity building missions. And then, of course, there are regional organizations, above all the African Union and IGAT, which are indispensable actors in promoting sustainable solutions. So the real challenge today is to strengthen cooperation among all these institutions while ensuring the local ownership remains at the center of this initiative. This is why today's program is particularly timely, I think. Our discussions will explore how deterrence and strategic resilience can reinforce stability in the Horn of Africa, how preventive diplomacy and innovative approaches, including AI-assisted analytical tools, can help anticipate crises before they escalate, and how strategic foresight can support more resilient regional and international partnerships. Ethiopia, as today's case study, offers a very important opportunity to reflect on how African-led solutions can contribute to addressing African security challenges. So I also think that the distinguished speakers gathered here and coming from different institutions, organizations, academia, leading research centers, reflect the breadth of expertise that we need to tackle these complex issues today. Their presence confirms that no single institution can effectively address today's interconnected security challenges alone. So let me once again express my sincere gratitude to the NATO Defense College Foundation and particularly to Ambassador Minuto Rizzo, and I wish you a very fruitful and productive discussion. Thank you.
And since we mentioned Ethiopia, I have the pleasure to introduce and invite to the podium Ambassador Sam Fabrizi, who is the ambassador of Italy to Ethiopia. Please, the floor is yours.
L'audio funziona? Spero che mi sentiate. Posso avere un cenno di così scontro?
Sentiamo.
Benissimo. Allora, thank you very much for giving me the possibility to share with you from some thoughts from Addis Abeba. So I tell also Salam che Addis Abeba. So saluti a tutti da Addis Abeba. I think it's fitting that this conversation you are having in Rome is focusing on the Horn of Africa and also considering a particularly focus on Ethiopia. Has been said by our president, and I think I would like to thank Ambassador Minuto Rizzo, a colleague, a friend, a mentor, and certainly a NATO Defense College for the kind invitation. And as been said, the Horn of Africa is stand at the crossroad of many different stream of work. So we have Eastern Africa, we have Central Africa, we have the Middle East, we have the Indo-Pacific, we have the overlook of the el-Mandeb Strait, the Red Sea. All these elements make the Horn of Africa one of the key security area where to focus our attention. Certainly the significance is not just geographical, it's clearly and increasingly geostrategic. And certainly while this is an area wide dynamic, and an area which is growing, an area which is having an outward outlook, certainly we see a number of different layers of dynamism / competition at stake. Certainly there is an intra-Africa dynamic, access for resources, energy corridors, access to the sea, management of the Nile basin, development of digital infrastructure, defense of the supply chain. There are also other challenges linked to demographic growth, illegal migration, and also outbreak of non-transmittable disease like the recent case of the outbreak of Ebola. We have on the Horn of Sea certainly a strong projection from countries from the Gulf and the Middle East who are projecting their influence both on land but also on the Red Sea. A case, for example, is the Somaliland. We also have a competing interest from third countries who are seeking the maritime routes that remain open to trade flows by establishing ports, military bases, the maritime infrastructure, including submarine cables. There is, of course, a level of cooperation centered around the African Union, IGAD, and an increasing number of bilateral agreements and initiatives to foster peace, dialogue, and cooperation. In some, it is necessary to examine the Horn of Africa having both a land and a maritime dimension, as Ambassador Minuto Rizzo said, considering the influence by the Gulf and the Middle East, and the role of the Red Sea as a global bloodline for trade. So I think it's positive that the region is increasing of interest of NATO, of the southern neighborhood dimension of NATO, the concept developed already since a couple of decades. And I think it's important to remember that back in 2015, NATO has established the military liaison office in Ethiopia, as well as an operational desk based at the headquarters of the African Union. I think we need to think about this, the Horn of Africa, also as a continual linchpin with also the other part of the Eastern Mediterranean, Central Asia, the Red Sea. And I think the 360-degree approach to deterrence and defense was indeed reaffirmed in the Ankara Declaration yesterday. As ambassador of Italy to Ethiopia, and also accredited to Djibouti, to South Sudan, and to the IGAD, let me give a little bit more detail on Ethiopia, a country which is at the center of Horn of Africa, is a gift both from its size and its location. It's also the seat of the African Union. It is widely recognized as the diplomatic capital of Africa, influential in the African Union, in IGAD, and beyond. Ethiopia is a dynamic country with a large and growing population that is estimated around 130 million plus people, and is naturally centered as an anchor of Horn of Africa. Is naturally involved and cooperating in development with the bordering countries, Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia. Of course, when you look at the security engagement, economic partnership, migration and health issues, peace, development, of course, and you think about Horn of Africa. For all these reasons, you have to recognize the role of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is engaged in a vast domestic reform process, supported by the World Bank, supported by international partners like Italy, who believe it important to develop and support and sustainable and inclusive growth. Of course, Ethiopia has also its security priorities, is very much developing a domestic strategy for looking at energy, food independence, certainly in response or in reaction also what are happening globally. Ethiopia went recently, last month, through a successfully and widely participated and peaceful electoral process, despite some domestic issue linked to the ethnic dynamic in the country, some international challenges, like, for example, the tension with Eritrea. So this is domestic Ethiopia. If I look at international Ethiopia, and also an ambitious plan to integrate itself and consequently the region into the global arena. If we think that next year Ethiopia will host the conference, the COP32, Ethiopia is engaged in accession to the WTO, is part of the African Free Trade Agreement, and also need to remember that since January 2024 is also part of the BRICS. Ethiopia is an active member of the United Nations, one of the largest contributors in the region, and currently serves as a member of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. If from my perspective, from my position here in Addis since end of last year, I could say that Addis is in a center of an extremely busy international agenda with a succession of high-level political visits from the whole quarter of the international arena. And of course, considering his strategic importance, when you look at its importance and influence on the Nile Basin, the instability or the stability on the country's neighbors, as I said, South Sudan, but also South Sudan, and the influence of Red Sea, you understand the importance and why Addis Ababa is an increasingly important global capital for politics and security. As mentioned, Italy and Ethiopia strong, very close historic relation. The political dialogue currently at its highest level. We had the fortune, the privilege of having the Prime Minister of Italy 3 times in Ethiopia in the last 3 years. We have accelerated, consolidated our diplomatic, development, economic, social ties. And Ethiopia is and remain at the forefront of the Malign plan, which gave the framework of the institutional and political relation between Italy and Africa. And I think also recently in February this year, Addis Ababa has been the co-partner of Italy in hosting the second Italy-Africa summit. If I zoom out from Ethiopia and move to the Horn of Africa, has been remembered, Italy has a historical strong footprint in the area. The Red Sea is an area where more than 40% of our maritime trade flows pass. So is it clear that the Horn of Africa, in a wider conception and enlarging perception, represent one of the Italian key security priorities? And we are engaged for ensuring, of course, peace, growth, stability in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea. Land, we have the military base in Djibouti, military contingents in Somalia. We are all participating to the European naval operation, both Aspides and Atalanta, and possibly in the future when the situation will allow also in the Strait of Hormuz. So we work closely, of course, with the African Union, with the regional organizations such as IGAD, and we are supporting a more proactive engagement by the European Union in the area to be as a trusted regional partner. So if I can make a final comment, it's clear that we have to work having in mind the regional approach. We need to support Africa solution for Africa. There are a number of hotspots in the region that, if left unchecked, are ready to irradiate their negative spillovers all over the region and beyond. We need to take in consideration there are a number of spoilers in place. The current crisis in Hormuz has not impacted particularly severely the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea. But it is clear that preventive diplomacy, conflict prevention is needed. And I am glad that this aspect will be dealt in the upcoming two sessions. So it is my pleasure to conclude my remarks, giving the floor back to you. Grazie. Thank you all for the attention.
And now we start the first session. I have the pleasure to invite the chair, Mrs. Francesca Fraccaroli, Chief of Global Information Security Center, UN Department for Safety and Security, so UN, please. Then I have the pleasure to invite El Hadji Ibrahima Diene, Special Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union for the Somalia Commission and Chief of AUSOM. So we have both the UN and the African Union. A veteran of Africa, Giuseppe Mistretta, former director for Sub-Saharan Africa of our Farnesina. And then Councillor Fabio Massimo Ballerini. He is councillor in the Office for the Diplomatic Advisor to the Prime Minister and the Mattei Plan for Africa Task Force. And then a compatriot, Luca Biche, Chef de Cabinet of the UN representative for the Horn of Africa of the European External Action Service. And finally, but not least, our NATO representative, Alberto Munisso. He's a special analyst, senior analyst of the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub Naples, the center that follows the Greater South and the Southern neighborhood as a whole. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to start this session. I think we are all here to really leave the floor to the speakers, that they will be able to provide the overview that we need, the analysis and the concrete approach that has been established in the Horn of Africa when we talk about global supply lines. I don't want to spend too much time to introduce myself. I work for the United Nations, though I'm here on a personal capacity. I think that we have 5 speakers here that they will run us through a very important topic to approach this discussion. But I think that we have in the audience also very qualified and very professional colleagues, ambassadors or stakeholders able to contribute as well. So I'll give the floor and we start with Ambassador El Hadji to present his speech. But I want that you are also prepared to intervene in the second part of this discussion, because I will open the floor for questions and comments. But let's start with Ambassador El Hadji, that I have a pleasure to know personally. Since he's a former colleague of mine. We were together in the peacekeeping mission in Mali, MINUSMA, the United Nations peacekeeping mission, but now he's here in a different capacity as African Union representative. Dear Boli, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Okay. I would like to start by saying my pleasure and honor to be here to represent Commissioner Bankole, the head of the Commission for the African Union Political and Peace and Security. I am currently the head of mission for AUSOM, the African Union Stabilization and Support Mission in Somalia for more than a year. Please allow me to convey my thanks to the organizer for getting us together to put this interesting topic to our table. I think my predecessor already said it clearly. Horn of Africa is very strategical. It is not only about Africa. It is also about global peace, global trade, global maritime security. And we need to open the lens to have more understanding. From the African Union angle, you hear about African solution to African problems. We believe that African security issues need African leadership with strong partnership. So I wanted to emphasize that. Deterrence and strategic resilience. Deterrence cannot be sustained if it is not built in legitimate national institutions supported by strong international partnership. We need resilient societies. We need also trusted regional partnership to work together. The Horn of Africa, I think deterrence as kinetic only military means will not be enough. We need more than that because the threat is hybrid. It is also about piracy and maritime crime, violent extremism, state fragility. We have also extreme climate fragility, humanitarian vulnerability, but also competition. I've already said about the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb. I would like to insist that to be effective, the deterrence in Horn of Africa should comprise very credible national security institution, capable regional security mechanism, resilient governance, economic opportunity for young people and local communities, strong community resilience against violent extremism, and trusted strategic communication against mis- and disinformation. I think the greatest deterrent is to ensure that population have trust in its constitution. I would like to quickly use the Somalia as a case study to highlight some aspects. Since 2007, African Union is in Somalia, and it evolved from AMISOM, ATMIS to today also. This long engagement has also seen some evolution, not only at the security and political, but also at the institutional capacity. I believe that we have seen stronger Somali ownership and leadership. We have seen strengthened national institution, closer coordination between the federal government, African Union, and international partner, and we are seeing a gradual transfer of responsibility to Somali state. So AISOM is not only a military mission. We have 4 strategic priorities. One is to deter and defeat Al-Shabaab. The second is how we can do stabilization, supporting local governance, state institutions, and all those aspects. The third strategic priority is protection of civilians. And the fourth one is how we can contribute with, in partnership with humanitarian actors to create safe and conducive environment favorable to humanitarian action. So all of that needs sustainment of our action in terms of how we can build. And we found a very original partnership between AU, UN, and the federal government. This tripartite partnership allowed us to have some political leadership, some military operational coordination planning together, but also a benefit from the logistic support provided by UNSOS. You have been following the latest development on UNSOS, so maybe we'll have opportunity to discuss about it. But hybrid threat required integrated responses. We need to make sure that we are getting together all disinformation, intelligence, diplomacy, technology, strategic communication, law enforcement, and development policy. So resilience should also be built on the society. The local communities are the first line of defense in all those aspects. We need to invest on local community and address the crossroads of all these issues. If not, we will not be having. Yes, we need to invest in early warning, rapid response. We have now II, and a lot of technology is available to better manage data, to better use data, to make sure that it is helping us build, better understand what is happening, what may happen, and how we can be better respond to prevent. Because prevention is cheaper. Prevention is more effective than having this action. So maritime security is regional security. Today, we cannot talk about the Red Sea if we don't have stable coastal communities, if we don't have just and equitable fishing, if we don't have capable national maritime institution, if we don't have interoperable Coast Guard capacity, and regional info sharing, and coordinated action against piracy and trafficking, and most importantly, blue economy. Hope needs to be available if whatever we do as investment will not work. I believe that partnership also must be done on comparative advantage and added value. We need to make sure that partners are coming based on the priority defined by countries and by local communities. If not, it will be investing in wind. And we need to build those local capacity and to avoid duplication and competition, and we need to strengthen regional institutions. In the African Union, we are talking about subsidiarity and complementarity to make sure that all the regional economic and regional institutions are properly used based on their level of capacity and development. So we need to make sure that we are exactly doing that. I think we will talk about sustainable financing. You're looking at me for the time. I will try to be briefer.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, and make sure that partnership, as we have seen with the African Union since 2007, need to be forward-looking. We will not get results as quickly as we wish. We need to invest on long-term, on durability, to make sure that the investment help better plan, improve operational effectiveness, accountability, and long-term institutional building. Looking forward, I think the Horn of Africa, I don't need to insist on the potential. I think we need to build a capacity to prevent instead of responding to crisis. Effective governance, inclusive growth, resilient institutions, resilient communities, and hope for next generation. I wish to reiterate that the African Union remain committed to work with Somalia, the Horn of Africa, and all international partners to ensure that peace is not only restored, but sustained. We must collectively invest in deterring conflict, but in building demonstrated capacity and resilience to anticipate, absorb, and recover from threat and conflict. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador Helaji Boli. There are definitely a couple of essential points on what you mentioned today that I pick up. But before, I prefer to leave the floor to the next speaker and continue with another case, because we have been focusing on the Somalia example with the African Union experience. And I want now to introduce an expert on Eritrea, not only, but definitely a person that has been working closely in this area and even producing a book. Is Giuseppe Mistretta, former Director of Sub-Saharan Africa at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, and yes, author of a book that is quite a rarity nowadays, on Tigray and the Invisible World, La Guerra Invisibile. The floor is yours.
Thank you for mentioning my book that now has 2 years of, it's old for the last 2 years because I wrote it immediately after the war in Tigray. First of all, let me thank Ambassador Minuto Rizzo for inviting me and the foundation and the staff of the foundation. I have a privilege among the speakers. I don't belong presently to any institution. I'm just an old diplomat, and I belong to myself. And so I'm an editorialist, soi-disant writer of books. And the book that was mentioned concerned the war in Tigray in the northern part of Ethiopia. Whoever is interested can read. You can find it in Amazon. And now it's not the case to linger on the book in itself. But we mentioned several times the tensions in the Horn of Africa, the tensions, the problems. Let's go a little bit deeper on this subject. Which are the main tensions now in the Horn of Africa? What can we do in order to prevent these tensions to grow further? And in my opinion, my humble opinion, the three major tensions are the following. First, the possible resurgence of a war in Tigray, because the war in Tigray is not finished, has never finished, was not finished with the peace of Pretoria, the Pretoria Agreement, and the tension in Ethiopia are growing and growing again. Not only in Tigray, but also in two of the main regions of the country, which are Oromia and Amara region, beyond Tigray. So this is the number one, because now, if a war with Tigray, that we hope doesn't take place any longer, but if it starts again, it is not only a phenomenon concerning Ethiopia and Tigray, but will concern the entire region, and spoilers, external spoiler, many of them. And so it's very, very concerning. The second main problem is the request, the strong request, can I say the arrogant request of Ethiopia to have an access to the Red Sea. We all know that the situation in the Red Sea is particularly tense now, also because of the because of the shutting down of the Hormuz channel. And it deserves the maximum of attention, because to have a new access on the Red Sea, of course, provokes further tensions among the main actors of the region. Ethiopia is a landlocked country, doesn't have access to the Red Sea. But Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan are very concerned about the possible access of Ethiopia to the Red Sea, because having a new partner, let's say, a new actor, in that very fragile condominium is very, very difficult, and could provoke new fibrillation in the region. And I can say much more of that, because Ethiopia now is asking the access to the Red Sea only on natural right. I mean, the natural right of a country that has 130 million people, and which is, again, landlocked. But doesn't exist such a thing as a national right to the access to the sea. So theoretically, if I remember well to the international right when I studied it, there should be an agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia, then a referendum in the contested area, and then, how can we say, an approval from the United Nations and from African Union. So it doesn't seem possible at the moment, considering all the problems, all the problematic situation in the region, to have such an agreement and referendum, etc. So seems to me another reason of great problematic tension. And the last one is the building, we mentioned already the dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which always, since the beginning, provoked disagreement from Egypt, because Egypt depends on the water of the Nile, and is fearful that the functionment, the full functionment of the dam can provoke a damage to the flows of the Nile River to Cairo, etc., and the Mediterranean. So if we don't solve, and Europe and NATO and whoever can, and African Union, if we don't solve and don't do the maximum effort in order to solve these three main reasons of tension in the region in the future, really the possibility of another conflict are very, very tangible. And so now to say something in positive terms, we have the Piano Mattei. Italy as a role to play in the region because it's very recognized for its past, for the collaboration, for cooperation, etc. I believe that at the moment Piano Mattei has a limit of being a only financial experiment. It should be more political. There is not a political chapter in the Piano Mattei. There is not a governance chapter in the Piano Mattei. And what I always say in these circumstances, because I don't belong to any institution, again, is that I feel strong that Piano Mattei can exert a better role if there is a political side of it and a governance side of it, that now, unfortunately, under my point of view, are non-existent. And they stop exactly at the 0 in the
Perfect.
timer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we had a very great start with the presentation from the African Union point of view and what can be done and what they are trying to do. Then we have been taken into the causes to try to analyze and even have a better sense what are the spoilers, what are the challenges of the situation. And the question now is for the third speakers that will have the chance to elaborate a little bit more the question that you just raised about Piano Mattei, because I give the floor to Fabio Massimo Ballerini, which is exactly the right person to represent here to explain a little bit more if the Piano Mattei for Africa has something more than only the financial aspect, the funding aspect on it. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank Ambassador Minuto Rizzo for the invitation. I very humbly represent here the Mattei Plan Task Force, where I've been working since the start of the strategy. It is a bit difficult to talk about after my former boss, Ambassador Mistretta, especially when he points out what is lacking in the Mattei Plan for Africa, and we hope that we'll be there in perspective. But let me just mention that at the second Italy-Africa Summit, which was held in Addis Ababa, as it has been recalled by Ambassador Fabrizi, Prime Minister Meloni stressed the fact that the strategy now has been built, has been established. It took, of course, some time. It took some time to create also some kind of new financial architecture to be sure that the projects could be carried out. And now probably we have the possibility to make it a little bit more political strategy. This is something that she said in the intervention in the summit on February 13th. I also think that the fact that she was hosted as an honored guest at the African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government represents also, let's say, a witness, a testimony of the fact that the African countries and the main continental organization has a hope in the fact that the Mattei Plan can be also a political strategy, and that anyhow it is working with the nations we are working on. I wouldn't underestimate the importance of finances, though. So just to counteract a little bit on what Ambassador Mistretta said. Money is very important, especially if we want to talk about connectivity, infrastructures, and regional integration. So let me just remind that under the Mattei Plan for Africa, Italy increased of 25% both the replenishment of the International Development Association with 733 million euros at the end of 2024, and of another 25% with 387 million euros to African Development Fund, which overall should be around 1.1 billion. It is important, I think, because we are in a time when official development assistance money is going down, and we hear the damages that these cuts have such an impact on projects from the non-governmental organization we work with every day. So part of this money is basically focused on the Horn of Africa. These are the most concessional windows of the multilateral development banks, And this money is usually very, very important because it is used for big projects, infrastructural projects, and at the same time, it is money that doesn't drag too much on the fiscal space of countries which have already fiscal issues since a long time. This just to mention that, of course, the political perspective is important. We will have to work on that, but at the same time, I don't think that any credibility could be put on the table if the money wasn't there. I would like also to stress a little bit the partnership we have been building with the European Union. Mattei Plan and Global Gateway, it was mentioned at the first Italy-Africa Summit in January 2024, wanted since the onset work together. We managed to do so, especially last year with a summit which was hosted in Rome on June 20th, where Prime Minister Meloni and President von der Leyen hosted a number of African authorities, and talking about connectivity and infrastructures in the Horn. That summit set a tangible result in managing to secure a financing for the enlargement and prosecution of the Blue Raman digital cable, which goes from Trieste to India, passing through Djibouti, which in perspective will link Kenya, Mombasa, and Tanzania with Dar es Salaam, and possibly, if the situation allows, Mogadishu to Somalia, and so connecting, of course, the region. So on this, we have been partnering with the European Commission, of course, and I'm very glad that also the artificial intelligence has been mentioned several times in the past intervention. Another flagship project of the Mattei Plan is the AI Hub for Sustainable Development. It is hosted here in Rome, and it managed to secure the development of 7,000 startups so far in Africa. Most of them, they come from Ethiopia and Kenya. So if we want to talk about a little bit more enlarged Horn of Africa region. I mean, in the Horn of Africa, many tensions stem from markets usually that are too small, very poorly integrated, financial systems which are very fragile, and logistics chain that in a constant context of very poor regional infrastructure do not work so much. The digital revolution and the digital challenge is one of the most pressing one, and I guess, and I think that in the Horn of Africa region, helping these countries, helping also the business and the private sector on this, can also help reducing tensions and going towards a shared prosperity. Not to be too rhetoric, but I think also infrastructures and connectivity and money and a political perspective, we have to think about small steps anyway. And de facto solidarity, which was, of course, mentioned 70 years ago here in Europe, and that brought a very good example of integration. The situation is, of course, different. Tensions are probably way more rooted, as Ambassador Mistretta pointed out. We are very worried about what could happen between Ethiopia and Eritrea, of course. But that's why we all collectively, we need to work together and make sure that this money which is put on the table and these projects can go towards a common objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have the feeling that, at least for me, this topic become clearer and clearer, more defined somehow with the example that has been given now in terms of contribution, in terms of support in concrete terms. I want to turn now to my right and give the floor to the next speaker and listen a little bit more from the European Union perspective. And I give the floor to Luca Mier for the next intervention, please.
Thank you very much also from my side to you, but also to the organizers and to my previous speakers. Thanks for bringing us all together also in this cross-cutting approach, which is also from our view extremely pivotal. The problem is after speaking after such good speakers, I always have to change my plan and take up a few of your points. But I will try that now in the next 5 minutes. It has been well described of why we are here, of the strategic relevance of the Horn and all this. I don't want to add to that, but I think if I want to use a layman's term now from a European perspective, the Horn of Africa is also our neighbor. And we feel when the Horn of Africa is undergoing changes, positive and negative. A few words that I noted down from my previous speakers were hope, solidarity, but also hybrid threats. And I think if we all, having worked on this region for some time, we can all remember 2018, there was this moment of hope and new beginnings and transitions. That was probably the key word. Now we look at a different diagnosis today. States are fragmenting, the crises that we see are regionalizing, and the threats and the conflicts are modernizing. New tools, new equipments, new strategies. So if I look at the theme of this panel today, and I look at the work that we do as a European Union, we have deterrence and we have strategic resilience, I find a lot of entry points and a lot of things echoed that we can already see. And of course, deterrence, number one, very much depends on the question, what is it that we try to deter? There's a lot of threats, and there will be a lot of different answers to those. Just, of course, as an example, indeed, I think it was mentioned before, we have our own soldiers in the region. We have our own boats in the region, responding to the threats with 2 CSDP missions on sea, more relevant than ever. Also responding to different threats, responding to in the beginning, the threat of piracy, and now responding to the threat, of course, of the Houthis, but also expanding some of the mandates, also responding to the threat of illicit flows of arms and equipment. So we need to be nimble and we need to adapt. It's not always easy with a union of 27 plus the institutions, but we certainly try our best, and especially with our operational speeders, we have been swift. Number 2, strategic resilience, of course, is an important factor as well. And I think here I can just echo the words of my previous speaker now. Of course, it is also about money, but of course not only. But I think we see now here the Horn of Africa as one of the regions with one of the lowest levels of integration amongst themselves. The economies, of course we have regional institutions, and it will always be our reflex to stand by their side. But this is of course part of the diagnosis. So we have, for instance, in that moment of hope in 2018, co-launched with our partners from the World Bank and the African Development Bank, and importantly the region, the Horn of Africa initiative. Which is an initiative that pushes forward the idea of joint benefits of regional cooperation. Now, 8 years later, we see that the finance ministers of the region are meeting 4 times every year under the initiative to discuss joint projects, even in times of tension. This is something that we need to capitalize on. But it would be remiss of me not to add a third element now to this panel, which of course also from our European Union perspective is the issue of regional security and regional security architectures. Of course, in the Horn of Africa, we see a region where this is lacking. But let's even zoom out a little bit more. If we look at the Red Sea space, it's the same. We are looking at a space where there's a lot of diplomatic work now necessary that of course also needs to add to these issues of development, to the issues of the drivers of the threats that we try to deter, of the strategic resilience measures that we try to apply. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think we value our cooperation with the regional institutions a lot. We've been, I think, if I look at the last 4 years working for this office, I see our travels being increasingly regional. Of course, in talking to many partners in that space, always with the same question: what is the common interest? What is the shared objective? And I think this is why I also started by saying we need to be nimble, because if we look at these different conflicts that we work on, it also requires different roles of us to play. Sometimes we revert to direct mediation, getting ourselves involved in that space. Sometimes we revert to rallying behind our partners. For instance, rallying behind the AU and the AU mission in Somalia, and we are supporting them steadily. But also, we are trying to rally behind the African Union or IGAD when it comes, for instance, to issues we see in South Sudan, and ask them for their guidance and advice where we can be helpful. In the Red Sea, it's a much more complicated issue, talking to much more stakeholders. But I think we have a role to play because, and this might be my last point for my last minute that I'm allotted. at the end of the day, for us, and I could see that as a recurring theme of our work, also as our office, there's a specific experience that we bring to the table as Europeans. And this is, of course, one of integration. And we've seen many crises over the last years where we also were diplomatically active in terms of de-escalation, where this always comes to pass. Me, I'm a born German, working very closely with colleagues from other countries. When we talk to our colleagues, our diplomatic colleagues in the region, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, from other countries, we always come to that same notion. We have an experience that was painful, but we overcame it by also collectivizing the discussion, by engaging in joint exercises of trust building. And we believe that, of course, expanding connectivity is one of them. So we try to incentivize them also to say what are joint projects, joint institutions that focus the mind on what you want to achieve together. And I think that's maybe part of our experience, what we can bring to the table as EU. But of course, we also have 27 very strong member states who sing that song with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can say that working for the United Nations, I feel the pain of a colleague when you talk about coordination between difficult members and found a common agreement. It's even more challenging for us, I can tell you. I move now to the last but not least speaker, probably to help us to give a little bit more of analysis overall of that context, because we really have a very useful example of partnership, coordination, integration. But I want to listen from the NATO Defense College point of view. Alberto Munisso, your view about this region and your analysis. Thank you.
So, thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Alberto Munisso. I'm the senior analyst at the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, and we specifically usually deal with Africa and the Middle East. We have been following, the evolution of Africa and the Middle East and the area of the Horn of Africa for several years now, also engaging with people on the ground. And let's say our focus has always been the one of understanding the common challenges. And this is something that I will recall at the end of the presentation. So, I would like to introduce my intervention by saying that when I think about the title, the Mediterranean Sea, I think of a sea characterized by several relations amongst countries. These relations, they tell usually a whole story of trade routes, and this is the main topic of the analysis that I've done for this intervention. Trade routes at the moment are being displaced by the current situation. I don't like to speak about crisis, I would just say current situation. Because let's say that the access to the Mediterranean Sea is being a little bit contested. There are three main accesses. There is the Suez Canal, the Gibraltar Strait, and then straits in Turkey that are the Strait of Çanakkale or Dardanelli, Marmara Sea, and the Bosphorus Straits. The problem now, I would like to focus on the Suez Canal. So in the moment, we are seeing that the Suez Canal is seeing a little bit of troubles, and due to these troubles, the maritime trade plummeted down by around 60–65% because people is now practically passing by Cape Town. This has a main issue. The main issue is that you are adding 3,000–3,500 nautical miles of navigation, so you are doing 10–15 days of navigation more, and this costs a lot of money. Why this is happening? This is happening because there are certain spillovers, and I would like to be very careful when I say there are signs of certain spillovers of the Iranian crisis. The first main spillover is at the mountain. You have a double choke point scenario. You have the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that is one thing that blocks trade, and then you have instability in the Red Sea. This endangers specifically the trade of oil. In fact, we have seen that just the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has decreased the trade of oil from there by 70%. So we're having prices beyond $100 per barrel. I mentioned instability in the Red Sea. I would like to explain a little bit more what I'm referring to. Instability in the Red Sea is motivated by non-state actors. I'm talking about Houthis in Yemen, everyone knows them, but also other actors, because there is Al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa. There are other non-state actors, violent extremist groups that are active, that may have ties to the maritime environment. Houthis specifically have received the drones by Iran in the past, and this is why they are highly likely using these assets to create problems at the sea. Then, going back to the violent extremist groups, we are seeing resurgence of piracy. We have 24 pirate attacks in the last 3-4 months that happened in the Horn of Africa. I'm referring to the hijack, for example, of MT Honor 25, Eureka, and Sword. These are 3 ships that have been hijacked recently. Why do I focus on piracy? Piracy, I would like to say, that creates danger at the sea, that has consequences. But piracy is not just a land issue. It's not just a maritime issue. It's also a land issue, because pirates, they live on land. If we see the peaks of pirate attacks in the Horn of Africa, we will discover a story of protection at land. This is why, for the NATO perspective, security agreements, security architecture agreements like the one that they're doing in the western part of Africa, the Yaoundé architecture, are interesting in the pirate environment, because this is where allied member states could do something more in terms of training, in terms of understanding how to cope with maritime dangers, so pirates. Conclusions. All this insecurity, this piracy, these attacks from violent extremist groups, namely the Houthis mostly, has a cost on maritime trade that is affecting us, but it's also affecting others. These costs are the spot freight rates that are beyond 25% more. We have insurance that now have practically doubled their fees on cargoes, but also on personnel on the boats. But most importantly, this cost stands on the African countries. Egypt has lost several billions of US dollars from revenues from the Suez Canal. Ethiopia has issues with foreign influences coming from other countries in the Middle East, in the Ethiopian-Sudan conflict. Tunisia and Morocco are net oil importers, so they're facing higher oil prices. And Libya and Algeria, they are producers of energy. So, this for saying that all what I said is going to be, I don't know if permanent, but for sure will last long. The situation has changed, and our potential partners in Africa are now facing new realities. So, as the organization that I'm representing, we should keep understanding and engaging with them to understand their challenges and find new opportunities to work together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a little bit cautious of the time. We have only 15 minutes left to conclude this session. There will be the second part later. So I suggest in these 15 minutes we can try to I would like to ask a couple of questions, but I try to really minimize my intervention, my question, to very much two specific topics. And then I open the floor for your question, for your intervention. Anyone in the public, in the audience that want to say something, please get prepared. If you allow me, I'll start with the very first one, which is not directed to any of you specifically, because I would like to receive a integrated or coordinated answer. One of the topics that I noted down in all of your intervention of these 5 speakers is partnership, coordination, integration. These are the words that has been used. And of course, starting from the African Union perspective, the current approach in Somalia, specifically the European Union, the local national governments as well, partners overall, Italy with the Piano Mattei. But another important and strategic actors, Ambassador El-Hadji mentioned that, is the civil society, is really the role of the community, the role of the people in this country, and how they can play an active role and not just be a sort of receiver or a passive element that just be nominated by great regional actors, but at the end of the day left behind in their own capacity to become a real operator. So my question, and maybe Boli, you know, you have experience in that from the UN approach. What does it mean exactly, have the civil society fully participated? I like the example that Italy made. I mean, the intention to open up startups and funding that. That's maybe something very much concrete. How much the use of artificial intelligence can come down to the level of people in Somalia, in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, I mean, to become again, to give a chance for these transformations. So that for me is a very important element, and how much the European Union maybe has been thinking. Sorry, I just give you a very large path to navigate through, and I give you very few minutes to answer. So I don't know if any of you want to start with this point. Thank you.
No, I think the stabilization aspect of all what we are doing, partnership needs to be rooted on priority, I think defined by strategic objectives, and also coordinated to some operational type of mechanism to fuse all who is doing what, where, and how, with how much, with what, and make sure that this coordination trickle down with some level of accountability. Mm-hmm. To make sure that every dollar count, every penny count, and is justified with concrete, with indicator of result, to make sure that communities or so objectives are met and properly met. So this is quickly what I would like to say.
Thank you very much.
Maintaining the same order and taking back the privilege of being not belonging to any institution, I would say that there is not much space for civil society in this moment in the Horn of Africa. We have a civil war in Sudan, the worst civil war ever in that region. We have dirigistic leadership, to say the least. So it's almost impossible for the normal people, for the civil society, to express 100% themselves. Don't forget that even in Ethiopia, the situation is not stabilized, but can be even worse than now. So yes, civil society would be very important, also considering that between Eritrea and Ethiopia there is a common ground in the middle, the Tigrinya tradition, let's say. But at the moment, the tensions prevail on the civil society issue. So unfortunately, in my humble point of view, there is no space, even in Somalia. In Somalia, there is another war against Al-Shabaab and the tension, the clanic tensions, etc. It is not easy to have a space, a pure space for democracy in this moment in the region, as we mean in the Western country. Another kind of democracy.
Thank you.
Well, for me to stick to my topic, I would say working on the reduction of the digital divide is very important for the civil society. It allows for turning ideas into possibly concrete opportunities and jobs. So I think a project like Blue Ramen, as I mentioned, enlarging the possibility to have internet access makes the civil society a little bit more at the center of the political landscape. Of course, internet can be turned down, as we know. But if there is no bandwidth, there is nothing to turn down. So I guess that's a perspective. And about the AI hub, we were quite surprised by the numbers of application the AI hub received in the first instance a year ago when it was launched. So it means that youth is there, ideas are there, we need to give them the possibility to express themselves and turn their ideas into concrete perspectives.
No, I really thank you for the question, because it's an important issue that is very close to us. So I think while we might probably all agree on the diagnosis to say that yes, the space is shrinking for civil society in the Horn of Africa, of course our job is to find a step forward and to also have some ideas. So why I thank you for the question is because, of course, I should have maybe mentioned this in the beginning. One thing that is very close to us is, of course, the civilian work. And here, Sudan is one of these examples. Yes, it's a civil war, and yes, it's not easy. But what we've done now about half a year ago, after having had a long history with the civilians in Sudan, is, for instance, what we've done is, together with the African Union, the UN, League of Arab States, and IGAD, we've created a new alliance, let's say, a new group that we call the Quintet, which has now, for the first time, come up with a formalized roadmap for the political civilian process. We've managed to score a few breakthroughs now already this year at the Big Berlin conference this year, and this is it's not a fix to the big conflict, but it's a contribution, and this is us also defending that space.
Very clear. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. Sorry, I was so much fixated on the time. So I'll let you, of course, I give you the time to inject on that point, please.
Briefly, just out of completeness, that also inside NATO, that is a political military organization, there is the understanding that civil society is fundamental under several, let's say, in several activities. For example, I mean, I would like to say that when we speak about development security nexus, when I see countries that they're doing, development activities with a component of security sometimes, I'm always quite happy, because it's very important. I come from another conference where we understood that it's very important in the African context also to fight, for example, violent extremism, to not only use kinetic power, but also understand that you need the development on the ground. So when I see projects like that, they address rural-urban divide, is very important, because that's where you have multidimensional poverty. But also in the field of artificial intelligence, I mean, something that we should take care of is that in Africa, in Northern Africa, and Horn of Africa, most of the people, they use different communication means. They have a lot of internet access with mobile phones, and that's where sometimes radicalization happens. So being, I wouldn't say the leaders, because leaders, I mean, African solution to African problems, but being aware of how to combat fake news into digital environments with the help of other actors is always something that could be relevant for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. But as I promised, I want to give the opportunity to the audience here to ask a question. I already, if I'm not mistaken, see an hand up here. How much we can go over? Because we actually have 6 minutes, not much.
But we have also a question from the web.
Oh, okay.
And it's from Mr. Massimo Alberizzi. He's the director of Africa Express, which is a specialized media in Italy. He is putting a question on Somaliland, the existence and the recent recognition by Israel. Anyone who wants to take the question?
If you want, I can answer, but it's not a question, it's just a consideration. It's not an answer to the question, but it's a consideration that, of course, an ambassador of Turkey and an ambassador of America at the same time, a former ambassador, two former ambassadors, said that the best ally of Somaliland paradoxically is Somalia. So until the situation in Somalia is so shaky, it's so difficult, of course, this makes the game easier for Somaliland to have international access. Nevertheless, Europe, Italy, etc., are always linked and connected to the one Somalia policy. So we recognize the Federation of Somalia and not Somaliland, Puntland, and this regional entity. But it's true that if the situation remains tense in Somalia forever, and in comparison, you have since 91 a territory which is rather tranquil and growing and peaceful, of course, this play a role in the region of Horn of Africa. Now, up to now, only Israel has recognized Somaliland, no other country. And this is a sign, in any case, because also the Arab League is linked to the one Somalia policy. So maybe it holds up with only one recognition.
Thank you. Shall we take only one question? I'm afraid I need to turn to, if you don't mind introducing yourself for the audience, and the microphone. The gentleman in here, sorry.
The gentleman.
Thank you. Well, I will introduce myself. If Fabio Ballerini has been, I mean, Giuseppe Mistretta is the former boss of Fabio Ballerini. I am the former boss of Giuseppe Mistretta.
I would have said the same thing.
So there is a continuity. I mean, 3 generations in dealing with the Horn of Africa. I've been also Director General for Africa, like Giuseppe, and Ambassador to Ethiopia. Now my question is on a topic which has not been mentioned, but is very important, I think. And this is the increasing presence in the region of other actors of an enlarged region, which are the Gulf countries, Turkey, Egypt, for the reasons that have been said, Israel also. So how all this can be seen by the speakers? I understand that they have to give a very short answer. But of course, this is important because each of them has its own agenda, and very often they are supporting different actors, local actors, in the crisis and in the conflicts which are taking place. Then on a point that has been mentioned by Ambassador Mistretta, and of course we cannot lean about historical rights, because it doesn't make sense and can be very, very dangerous. But there are certain issues which can be solved in a cooperative way. For instance, the fact that Ethiopia is now landlocked, through a cooperation, we can find solutions for which, without modifying territorial integrities, we can have a situation in which it can be easy for Ethiopia to have the possibility, I mean, to have the mobility necessary towards the sea. Or even the issue of the Nile. I mean, there too, a cooperative way can be found, because there is not in all these things only a zero-sum game, but there can be also win-win game. And I think that for the waters of the Nile, this can be done. There are studies about it for which there can be good solutions. There has been a process in which for quite some time the countries, especially Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, have cooperated. Then there has been some acceleration which have modified this. So I think that we have to move towards an approach that is in favoring these win-win solutions. On this, the European Union can have a role. On this also, the Global Gateway can have a role in this, and in this framework also the Mattei Plan. So I think that the role of Western countries and of Europe should be to look to favor this kind of cooperative solution and go in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can, if one of you can just feel comfortable to comment very, very briefly, maybe with a clear injection on what has just been suggested. These other actors, that is true, we didn't mention, but they are there and they are very visible and they are strong, and also sometimes unclear, the game, this sort of asymmetric role that they are having. Who want to react on that? You start.
Yeah, I think the geopolitical competition is a growing reality. At the African Union, we really want to foster multilateralism. But how this will happen and compete on the ground, as long as the sovereignty of the state are respected and have some type of practical aspect, it has pros and cons. It can be an opportunity, but it can be a constraint. In sometimes more a constraint than an opportunity, because it is blurring lines and making people play among the actors and try to use this competition as a tool. So this is quickly what I can tell about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From the European Union, sure, please.
Yeah, Ambassador, you raise an incredibly important point, but I think on this one we need to take a step back. I think we are now in this, what we call this double crisis, right? We have the crisis of multilateralism, the crisis of regionalism, right? We have two concurring problems, and I think what we see from the diplomatic everyday business, it's getting crowded. But that comes with a few responsibilities on our side. What we see is the emergence of a lot of ad hoc formats. We don't only see singular new actors emerge, but we also see new constellations of alliances, some that are quite fluid. That requires us to do a few things. It requires us to coordinate much more. I'm thinking about Sudan, where we have a plethora of coordination frameworks that are partly overlapping. On Somalia, not very dissimilar. But this is our obligation, and I believe this is also something we need to continuously map and improve. Number two, comparative advantage, just like you said, Ambassador, to always figure out who is the best, who can bring something to the table, and how can we divide the labor.
Thank you very much. I'm turning around to see if it's true that we can go ahead with a last question. Over to you, please, and we try to be absolutely synthetic in the answer. Please.
Thank you so much. This is very gracious of you. I will be very brief. My question is to Mr. I'm so sorry. To Mr. Munissa. My name is Kate. I'm from South Africa. I'm an independent geopolitical intelligence analyst. I particularly would like to ask a question about the Cape Town route. What possibly structural and security enhancements should South Africa prioritize to mitigate the logistical penalties of Cape of Good Hope route and establish it as a resilient maritime corridor, if it's possible to answer that question? Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much for your question. It's very specific, and I will highly likely revert back to you so we can exchange business cards. What I would like to say is that usually when I see this kind of situations, something that is very important and relevant just to allow a smooth interdiction at the sea is to have regional security architectures with other countries in the region which are sharing borders. Because I don't want to get into the technicalities of maritime interdiction, but the problem is that maritime interdiction takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of route, and sometimes for just 10 nautical miles, maybe the South African ship cannot stop the smugglers or the pirates. So this is something that we might discuss maybe later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can close here now this first session. We will continue with the second part of the discussion. And again, I want to thank you all the speakers for the really very rich and fruitful presentation and discussion. Thank you all. I think I can we go back. Yeah. Yes, we can sit down there. Oh, thank you. Oh, you want to take maybe just well, we take a picture or
picture.
Yes, we take all a picture together and then we'll give to the next group.
Ma se me lo toglierei pure io, però.
So we are now a bit, as you see, make a musical chairs game and reshuffling a bit the thing. But I want to start inviting to the podium the participants of the next section. First of all, the chair, Gaia Pellegrini Bettoli. She is an independent author and journalist. Welcome. Then Professor Nyagale Bagayoko. She is the president of the African Security Sector Network in Paris. And finally, Nicola Minasi. He is the head of the crisis unit of the Farnesina. I will not say Mission Impossible man, but almost. His specialty is to fish out Italians from difficult situations. The floor is yours, please.
Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the NATO Defense College Foundation for inviting me here to chair. It's an honor. It's also really a pleasure to listen to all the expertise that we've listened to so far. My name is Gaia Pellegrini Bettoli. I have nothing to do with the Horn of Africa. I'm a Middle East expert. To prepare for this session, before I introduce you to true expertise, I spoke to my sources, so you're only as good as your sources are, they say, in the Horn of Africa, both former ambassadors but also civilians. And many aspects emerged regarding Ethiopia and the triangulation that happens in the area. And I'll just add one phrase to start so that I leave the floor to the true experts. But what was said to me was that the, let's say, unofficial rule of thumb and the diplomatic rule in the Horn of Africa is, and I quote, "If you don't support my opposition or rebels, I will not support those against you." And an additional aspect within also the issue of Ethiopia and Eritrea, the fact that Ethiopia has a deep wound, has not really truly accepted at all in Eritrea's independence. So now I will pass the floor to, I will start first with Dr. Nyagale Bagayoko. I hope I'm not butchering your name. And you can illustrate the very interesting platform that you've developed together with the NATO Defense College Foundation and its very concrete scope and what it could be used for. So let's get right to it. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to present to you the platforms that we have been developing together with the NATO Defense College Foundation at the request of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is aiming to provide no, it's not the right page, I'm sorry. Could you come back to the menu? Yes, exactly, that's fine. So how is this, the timer can begin, thank you. How is working this, can you go back to the title, please? Just above, the page above. The title itself, yes. So what we've been developing is an Ethiopia AI decision support dashboard. Which is in fact very comprehensive because we do consider that to have a good understanding of any country in the world, there is a need to have a 360-degree vision of it. That's the reason why, can go below, we have developed first we have developed 4 quadrants. and I will very briefly present them to you, even if they are very, very rich and there are lots of information that can be found there. So what is the first quadrant? The first quadrant is institutional framework. So we can go there, and you can see that we have developed information about all those aspects, the government, the parliament, the local authorities, even the armament. So I will just give you an example by deep dive there for government. So you have also, we all know that President Abiy, no, please go down. So you have a number of ministers who are presented here. And if you click here on details, for Anna Araya Selassie, please, details. See, yes, you can see that you can find a biography of her. So you know who's who, in fact. We also tried to characterize, please go down, to characterize the kind of leaders that are the government. You have the technocrats, you have the reformists, and you have also those who are more security oriented, all right? So now, to give you another example of a section, we could jump to the equipment and armament section. So just over here. So I will not show you everything, cyber, smart city, telecom, warfare, but only combat drone arsenal, for instance. So you can see all the armaments that Ethiopia do have presently. That's another example. So now, because I only have 4 minutes and a half left, let's jump to the second quadrant, which is very, very important, which is more often than not completely overlooked, and which is the informal sphere. Please go up. It is the informal sphere, which needs very comprehensive knowledge to have all the clue of the security, political, social landscape of a given country. So I will just give you 2 examples of actors which are key in this informal sphere. First, you have the religious landscape. So please deep dive. And here you can see under this section all the religious authorities. Then you can also look at what are the inter-religious relations, the intra-religion relations. But here, religious authority, you can see also the 3 primary phases in the country. And for instance, there are major institutions. For instance, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church or the Ethiopian Islamic Affairs. That's just an example. And you also do have an inter-religious council. But Protestants and evangelists are growing and beginning much more important today. Then let's jump to the third quadrant, which is about the informational space. Just very quickly, let's have a look at the state and public services in Ethiopia. So you have all the official medias, which do have a very dominant position in the informational landscape. But please go to the social networks and digital space, what you can find. And here you can see what is the most influence. And you can see that, for instance, TikTok is rapidly growing and might even be considered as explosive. And then the fourth quadrant, which is about international arena. First, you have all interstate relations, major partnerships. So you can go through, you can see Italy, Germany, etc. All the major partner, Arab, AAU, etc. You can also have a look at the tensions between the different actors present in Ethiopia. For instance, Aegean Nile water you were mentioning, Somaliland, MOU crisis, Eritrea, etc., Sudan, all the disputes which are today very important. I realize that I forgot to show you the role of all. Can you go back to gradient informal actors just to show the rebel groups, please? No, informal sphere. Yes, armed groups and militias. And you have everything about leadership, and here you have all the different rebel groups that we can be found. Just very, very quickly, because I only have 5 seconds left, if you can just go to the forward assessment. The forward assessment, based on all the indicators that we have been considering, is this one with this matrix, with the most highest probable scenario, which would be a multi-front armed offensive here, congruent with the ambassador was saying as well. But also we can consider that US might be a mediator to make the situation de-escalate. And also, finally, there is a risk of internal fracture within the presidential party. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bagayoko. There will be time to do a deeper dive in the question time, even though it will only be for the panelists. I'm very pleased to introduce to you the head of a crisis unit, Nicola Masi, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Rome.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo, Alessandro Politi, and the entire team from the foundation. It's a pleasure to be here and see so many people interested in these topics. And congratulations on this presentation. Very, very impressive. Am I supposed to say something in particular? Or otherwise, I would be very happy to comment on what we just saw. Just by a way of introduction, my job is to work to help Italians in need in case of great dangers. So we intervene in case of terror attacks, kidnappings with terror aims, evacuations in case of war. In the last few years, in Africa, for example, we evacuated around 100 Italians from Khartoum when the civil war started back in April 23, July 23. It was the moment of evacuation from Niger, and so on. And we had cases of kidnappings also in the continent, although mainly in the Sahel. But we also have a history of kidnappings in Somalia, for example, due to pirates and so on. So the job of our team is to try to understand in advance and try to have as much as early warning as possible about possible crisis situations so that we can intervene to help nationals get out in time, and also alert colleagues to be in touch. I see my colleague and friend Fabio Massimo Ballerini, when he was posted in Mogadishu, we had a few exchanges on similar situations. So what we just saw is very, very helpful in terms of gathering information, presenting them in a way that is usable, at the same time, it's really interesting to see how in the very last few years this type of effort has been growing, and how difficult it is to also make it operational. And we have been experimenting with similar tools, and I think it would be interesting to share some of the lessons that we are learning. But I would like to say it up front. We have not found a definitive answer about how to use AI or open source information to get the job done. The problem is that, first of all, usually in security matters, there is this slogan about the need to know, meaning that only people who really need to know something confidential or classified need to be allowed to do that. But in this type of effort, there is another need to know. You really need to understand what you have to know in order to operate. And that's not a given fact. It takes time to understand what you don't know and what you should explore. Because basically, most of the information is already out there in the open. It's usually part of open sources. The problem is to understand how to use those open sources to really look for the needle, for the weak signal that tells you that something might change. For example, something we noticed after the invasion of Ukraine is that in a number of countries, because of rising inflation, rising energy prices, especially in low, middle-income countries, lots of revolts took place because people were becoming poorer. So they were using 80% of their salary just to pay for rent and food, and they couldn't live with the remaining 20%. So that alerted us to the fact that there are some variables that have an impact on wider equilibria. And if you manage to guess those red lines or those parameters that are being changed, you might have enough early warning about a changing situation. And it's important to understand where to look for this. So in a way, sometimes questions are more important than answers. It's especially this time, this period we are living, it's extremely easy to be overwhelmed with data once you ask something, and not all the data is relevant, and the way data are connected among themselves is very relevant. So it's quite important to spend time on understanding that. Another interesting fact, and I liked very much the graphics of what you presented, Doctor. User interface is very important. These are instruments that become useful when people using them enjoy using them. They need to be understandable. You need to understand how they work, and they become like companions. So it's very important to develop something that people can really use, and rather than forget, like a new program that maybe it's hard to use. But then there is another interesting part. As of late, we focus a lot on artificial intelligence. But then the question is, who will operate? How do you make that information actionable? And how much, for example, do politicians trust artificial intelligence? How many leaders would decide on major political decisions based on the information from ChatGPT or any other advanced AI system? So there is still a sociology of artificial intelligence that is very important. And not just for the leaders, it's also for organizations. It's extremely hard to introduce something that can be where everybody in the organization can buy in, because there is consensus that it's really well done, that it's useful, and that it's working well. So we still need a lot of traditional intelligence to make artificial intelligence work. So it's important to look for the right parameters. There is a lot of still human work to do on that, creating the consensus in the organization to know what to look for, to row in the same direction. And finally, all of these are living instruments. it's very hard to create something that once it's completed will stay that way forever. You need to keep it up all the time, update it, update information, update the operational aspects, and look into the details of it in order to make it useful. So it's extremely interesting to see this in the working, and very, very helpful to discuss on this. So thank you for the occasion.
Thank you for your points. Extremely interesting. You've also preempted one of the questions that I was going to have for you. So I will start instead with Dr. Bayayoko first.
Sorry, may I just give a very short answer to
sure.
what the gentleman just said? In fact, it's very important to know that all the data which I just presented are not only based on AI, it's also based on human intelligence. And you have here my colleague Medane Tadesse, who've been at the core of the analysis of any and the verification of any information gathered by the AU. So I completely agree with you. There is a need to combine artificial and human intelligence. That's absolutely crucial, and that's what we've been trying to do. Thank you.
Sure. I think actually you had asked me if your colleague could make a very quick statement on this issue, so I will give you 1 minute if you'd like to speak. If someone could pass the mic to the gentleman with the green hat in the middle there. 1 minute.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think this is a very strategically very deep analysis, and about even the historicity of the Ethiopian state and why, like in many in Africa, it doesn't only restrict to Ethiopia. It represents several African countries. Why African countries are, capable of violence but not governance, and it's very critical why Ethiopia is descending to another, violence, and there are indications there, like for instance the increase in policy rents for violence, policy rents, which is the international political economy and international relations around the Gulf. The increase in the grammar of violence in Ethiopia itself. So I think the methodology is very expansive and inclusive. That's what I can say because of time limitations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'd go back now to Ambassador Minazi with his question, but then I'll come back to you, Doctor. I'd like to know what you view as the consequences beyond the Ethiopian borders in the Horn of Africa. What you view as, yes, the consequences beyond the Ethiopian borders in the Horn of Africa.
You mean of the ongoing situation?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Well, what we are observing is that there are, first, again, just one more clarification. It's very clear that it's not only I was making a more general comment on the new type of instruments that are available. In that sense, from our point of view, at least my job is that paradoxically, even if you see a very tense situation, it might not necessarily impact on the needs or on the situation of Italians in the area. So, for example, from that point of view, the situation is stable unless there are new clashes that create an impact on tourism, on commercial activity, on factories operating. We did have lots of these situations in the past, changing a lot also considering the different actors involved. You might have, it was an Italian company working on the Great Dam, for example, so they had security issues as well. But in general, that's a hugely strategic area, and so the ripple effects can go very far and wide, and so we are very alert to that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we see a direct impact, but it's important to study the evolving situation and think about alternative scenarios to see in which direction you are going early enough to react.
So highly volatile. Dr. Bagayoko, would you like to comment on the same point?
No, I fully agree. I would like to add that, as mentioned by our colleague from the African Union, it's very important to have a strong link between preventive diplomacy and rapid reaction. This is absolutely crucial, and I think that most of the effort to prevent conflict have in fact not failed in early warning, because there are plenty of tools, but they are failing in the rapid reaction after a crisis has exploded. I think this point is very important.
So the model that you've developed here, though, is with a view also, obviously, to identify all these points early on to be helpful in this direction.
It's not only to, in my view, this tool is not only dedicated to identify risks of crisis. It's going much beyond, because it is also a tool which enables one to have a better grasp of what a local environment and context is about. Because answering crisis is not only reacting, it is also developing the more comprehensive and thorough knowledge of a given context.
Thank you. Yes, of course.
I think it's very interesting, because it kind of complements what I was mentioning before. Like if a crisis erupts, then there are many different dimensions to it. So there might be diplomats rushing to deliver aid on the ground, those working on preventive diplomacy or security building measures or confidence building measures. There are those, like my team, working on rescuing nationals on the ground. So that's why it's so, on the one hand, important to share the same picture, and on the other, how it is not always so granted that if you have the same picture, everybody moves in unison. It's a huge organizational effort that is needed, and that must be built every time. And depending on the situation. Sometimes you cannot, priorities change. Maybe the priority is take everybody out and then we'll look at humanitarian aid. Or sometimes the political options are simply not available. There are multilateral efforts, bilateral efforts. So it's having that one single picture that is shared is an additional burden that systems must manage.
Thank you very much. I'd like to know from Dr. Bagayoko, do you see any impact on Ethiopia from the civil war in Sudan? Is there, and excuse my language, any opportunity for the Ethiopian current system, or is it a challenge?
I would say it is both, depending on who you are looking at which actors. It's sure that there are connections between what is happening in Sudan and the situation on Ethiopia. But I'm not sure that fueling conflict in the Sudan region might help the Ethiopian government, which is already entrenched in tensions between with other actors in the region.
Because these alliances are constantly shifting. Also, we're seeing there are a lot of frenemies at times. I would like your take as well, Ambassador.
I'm really not the expert here to talk about that. Ambassador Mistreta and many others are really the expert about that. But my simple comment there would be that this is an area where instability has been simmering for very long. So even before the birth of South Sudan, for example, the security in the Red Sea was an issue because of smuggling, weapons smuggling, going to the Sinai, to the Middle East, because of the influence of so many other actors that are now more numerous, stronger, and more influent. So unfortunately, we come from a long history of instability, and that is becoming even more complicated. And also, we live in a situation where those who can just act. And it's very hard to use also multilateral instruments to rein in the violence, harder than in the past. So it is more complicated for sure. So regardless of the situation in Ethiopia, I mean, there are a number of factors that increase volatility, instability, and make things less manageable.
Thank you very much. Both ambassadors on remote and Ambassador Mistreta also were mentioning the importance, obviously, of Ethiopia and its population. It's the second most populous country in Africa, which also has, obviously, has a role. I would actually like to ask you, what do you think that securing navigation in the Red Sea would be better suited for an ad hoc coalition, or should it become part of a NATO mission? Just thinking back to the recent summit that just closed.
Again, I'm completely ignorant about all of that.
A historical perspective on what's happened on piracy, etc. That would be.
Oh, okay. So what I think, and what we learned from the past, when there was the season of ship hijacking by Somali pirates of Somalia until around 15 years ago, what we witnessed is that somebody, I think it was Mr. Muniz, who said piracy is also a very much a land-based phenomenon. And in that case, what we witnessed was a very strong international coalition of the willing, a de facto coalition, which today, for example, is very hard to see in the Strait of Hormuz. So you had China, you had the US, you had Italy, all on a bilateral basis, but working together. And that eventually worked. So if there is a very strong shared interest, eventually solutions are found. I think the answer to your question is not so much whether ad hoc or NATO is better, is what would work better in order to build the consensus.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm told we only have 1 minute left, so 30 seconds each for a closing statement on something that's significant that you think has been missed or not highlighted enough until now.
No, because I have not answered your question. So
yes,
very quickly,
but
very quickly, and I will conclude at the same time. What is very important to take into account is the role of Middle East actors on the security and geopolitical landscape in the Horn of Africa as such. Of course, the Red Sea is at the core of this tension, but also for actors which are coming from far away. For instance, Russia is eager to also have an access to the Red Sea via Sudan, for instance. So this is the first point. And the second one is there is a need not to forget that the region is the one where we have seen emerge new states in the past 25 years. And the risk is still present to see new states emerging from the tension we can see within each of the countries.
Because of the wounds we were talking about that are not really healed. Part of it is that. Your closing remarks.
Time is up. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And now, another musical chair game. And I'm very happy to introduce you now the speakers of the next session: African resilience, regional foresight, and crisis prevention. You had already, a very good start with this debate, which was quite rich. And I want now to call the chair, Mr. Patrick Smith, Editor-in-Chief of Africa Confidential and the Africa Report, to the podium. Alan Boswell, Project Director of the Horn of Africa International Crisis Group, which is quite well known. Bitania Tadesse, Policy Specialist for Africa International Peace Institute from New York. Jesuti Milehin Akamo, Researcher and Policy Analysis Unit Coordinator of the Institute for Peace and Security Studies directly from Addis Ababa, which is, we are quite proud to have him with us. And last but not least, Jalal Getao Biru, Senior Analyst of ACLED, which is an essential component analyzing the development of violence and instability. Thank you for being with us. So the floor is yours.
Hi. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for the introduction. I believe a couple of you have prepared PowerPoint slides. It might make sense for us to go straight to that. Thank you. So with that in mind, could we go straight to Jalali from ACLED? And before we started, you took me through some of your work, and I think practically everyone in this room knows what pioneering work ACLED has done in terms of putting together the data on the ground of what's happening in terms of conflict, what's happening in terms of military movements around the world. It's a global organization, but it's done particularly valuable work, and as a journalist covering Africa for quite a while, it's incredibly valuable. So we can go through the introduction to what ACLED is doing, particularly in Africa, and its application, and I think that will really set us up for the discussion, which is both on the sort of quantitative analysis of what is going on the ground in Africa, in the conflict systems, but also understanding the strategic analysis that comes out of that and the actors that are involved in that. So perhaps we can go first to the ACLED PowerPoint and discuss that. And if you can do it in 6 minutes, that would be absolutely brilliant. I know you're a real professional, so you probably timed it down to the last second. So please, if the technical side is ready, I assume they are. You're ready. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the great introduction. Since the region is very complicated, I will try my best to finish my presentation within 6 minutes. Since it's data related and so on, I just thought PowerPoint will help my discussion. So let's figure, yes. So first I will talk about what ACLED is doing, what we do, in case if there is anyone who doesn't know us. ACLED stands for Armed Conflict Location and Event Data. And we are an independent, impartial global monitor that collects, analyzes, and map data on conflict and also protests all over the world. And we provide detailed information to help identify and understand and track also patterns and trends in conflict and protest in crisis situations. So what do we do? Like ACLED data as an early warning asset, we are very important because our events are geolocated to the last administrative unit or locality. And we collect information using local language, over 80 local languages. As I said, we cover each country all over the world. So that puts us in a very good position to know what's going on locally in each country. And what do we code? We code actors, and we have actor types as well. And we have sub-events, different events, and interaction types. And we also add notes for those who are interested what happened in a specific location. And we also include number of fatalities if it's reported. If it's not, that will be noted in the note section. And we also have tags, for example, civilian targeting, local officials being targeting, women being targeted, and so on. So this is why our data is very important when it comes to early analysis. We are very reliable. For Africa, for example, we have data since 1997, so you can see the trends as well. And our frequency, because of time, I have to go very fast. We have weekly report, bi-weekly report, and for some cases we have daily report. For example, for Iran crisis, we have a daily report as well. We share our data for our stakeholders. And we tend to find emerging violence patterns within a few days. And we capture fighting before front lines are officially identified. As I said, we have a consistent methodology. For Africa since 1997, you can see our data there and try to see the trends, what has changed, what didn't change. And also we have a standard actor coding. So it's easy to use as early warning asset for anyone who's interested. I have brought to you analysis focused on Horn of Africa. These case analyses are based on our data and what we have observed from political developments and so on. I know this workshop is focused on Ethiopia, but I have brought to you our predictions for the next 3 to 6 months, what's going to happen in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia, because most of the time what happens in one country tends to affect the neighboring countries. They are neighboring countries. So for Ethiopia, what's going to happen for sure is that the Tigray Defense Forces, TDF, led by the TPLF, they are highly likely to fully mobilize before the end of rainy season for Ethiopia. That will be mid-September, to forcibly occupy disputed territories in Western Tigray. And this will that will be the basis for conflict scenario, or for our conflict trajectory for the next 6 months. How other armed groups are going to align with TPLF, with TDF as well. So we have a possibility that FANO might not align together with OLA, which is for us, that's the highly possibility is that FANO and OLA are not going to align, but they will continue fighting in their own region where they have been active. The second scenario is FANO is aligned, OLA is not, and that's still our medium scenario that might happen, but as you know, FANO is not centralized. The others are low likely. Because of time, I have to go very fast. And for Somalia, we have noticed that there is a high mobilization between Puntland forces and the federal government forces. So our scenario comes from there. We highly anticipate that clashes between Puntland and the federal government will likely happen before the end of the rainy season. And also for Sudan, what will happen in the next 6 months is that they will replicate what they have done in 2025 rainy season, which is that they will focus on the drones instead of direct confrontation. But what we have been observing, sorry for being late, 1 minute, and all of it, they will try to control it, but both of them, meaning that the RSF is not going to control El Obeid. I will quickly follow that ACLED's early warning capabilities. We have 2 tools that anyone could sign in and use. The first one is ACLED's conflict index. As an example, prior to the start of the Sudan conflict in April 2023, we have managed to identify Sudan as highly possibly crisis area. So this is how we managed to forecast what was going to come in 2023. Another tool you can use on our website is the Accolade Conflict Alert System, CAST. Here you can add any country, but for this purpose I have brought Ethiopia, and we predict how many events are anticipated in the next 1 month based on the past 12 months data we have. And you can even see here in each region whether there's going to be a high or low number of expected events. And what Accolade data cannot tell policymakers. As an example, if an armed group controlled an area without any contestation, on our data there will be no violence events, and it seems like that area might be peaceful, but that's not the reality. That area is being controlled by an armed group which is not the government. So Accolade data might not tell you what's going on there politically, but if there's a violence there, we will definitely show you there. Another thing we cannot show you is that how closed-door policy decisions and shifts in foreign regimes change conflict. As an example, I have brought to you that in Ethiopia, if you know what's going on in Ethiopia, in the coming days, there is going to be the national dialogue. We have seen the agenda, and from agenda, we don't know what they will decide on these agendas, but we anticipate that some of the decisions might lead to violence. In areas, for example, there is a disputed ethnic-based territorial disputes and so on. So we don't know what's coming, but we can say that something might come. So this is a very short presentation of what's going on. Thank you very much for your time, and sorry for speaking too fast.
That was tremendous. Thanks so much for taking us through lightning tour of the region. Could I just start by asking you a general question about the tempo of conflict? Because you're mapping on a really granular basis these conflict incidents. And Accolade has been gathering this data for over a decade or more, right? What does it tell you, as we're focusing on the Horn, about the level of conflict in the Horn? Is it true that for every country under which we group the total Horn of Africa, there's been an uptick in conflict without fail, every country in the region? Or there's some exceptions?
It depends on how you see our data. If you see it individually for each country, it will tell you different patterns.
Right.
For example, if you see as a whole what's happening in the past 2 years, the conflict in Sudan and also what's going on in Somalia because of the counterterrorism and so on, you might see the level of violence increasing. This also includes sometimes South Sudan as well, where the past 1 year a new round of conflict have started. But if you see individually each country and each region within this country, it will tell you different story. For example, since Oromia is one of the regions in Ethiopia, since it was already mentioned where OLA is active, our data shows you, for example, in December 2024, there was a peace agreement between a faction of OLA and the federal government. What our data shows you is that in Oromia, the level of political violence have decreased compared to the previous years. Right. So from December 2024, you can mark and see the decrease. We are not saying that the violence have stopped, but compared to the previous 2 years, it has stopped. Another example is that at this moment, what we notice in 2026 is that the activities of Fano militias have increased in Western Oromia. Normally, right. Fano is active in Amara region, right. Traditionally. But right. Now we are seeing a high level of violence involving Fano in Western Oromia, where OLA used to have a very high activity there. So this will tell you, since we are talking about early warning, what's coming next. Is the government going to step in and start forcing Fano militias from there? Is OLA going to start clashing with Fano? So this is how, like, one example of how you can use our data as an early.
You mentioned in your scenarios if there may be an alignment between the OLA and Fano, which would be a big problem for the government, assuming they're going to ally against the government. But from what you're saying at the moment, that doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Yeah, we don't have an indication. This alignment is mostly with TPLF. So what we have noticed during the northern Ethiopia conflict in 2020, 2022, is that OLA aligned with TPLF, and they even started being active in Amhara region, specifically in eastern Amhara, where the Oromia Special Zone is, if you are very specific there. But right now, we don't see any official alignment, but it might happen. So that's one of the scenarios we are predicting using our data.
How valuable is your data going to be in the coming months? Because there is a general sense in Ethiopia that tensions are mounting between the TPLF and its leadership and the federal government at Addis Ababa. And you mentioned actually in your scenario there that one of the outcomes you think is likely to happen, that the TDF will mobilize across into Amhara, and that's obviously a major risk. To what extent can your data help people make sense of all these allegations and counter-allegations? I mean, I was in Ethiopia last December, and there was a spate of allegations about the TPLF mobilizing on the border with Amhara and so on. Are governments using your data and countering that, or independent agencies like the UN and the AU using your data to say, well, that's just wrong, that's not happening? Are you able to get to that level of granularity to contradict some of the narratives that are being put out in the media, for example?
So at this moment, what our data shows is that there is a mobilization by TDF. It's even official, where they have restarted training soldiers for TDF, and they are officially mobilizing. And different governments use our data. The UN use our data. As an example, European Union, if I'm not mistaken, they use our data, and the German government and other governments use our data. The Ethiopian government, we have no knowledge of, but we are happy to collaborate with any government that's interested to use our data. But our data clearly shows at this moment that TDF is active, let's say, in the neighboring Afar region. TDF is active in neighboring Amhara region, specifically to the southern part of Tigray, the neighboring border. And they are also trying to penetrate the western Tigray area, which has been controlled by pro-Amhara government, but officially it's within Tigray region. So they have been trying it within the Tetkazeh River and also from the Sudan side. Right. We also have evidences and data that they are active from the Sudan border. So this is what our current data shows. Our assumption as analysts based on our data is that TDF will definitely mobilize to control Western Tigray. Right. The question is how and with whom are they going to collaborate is the scenarios that we are predicting for the next 3 to 6 months.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I think, shall we go to the next PowerPoint presentation, and then we can then have a wider discussion based on all this data. Juzuti Malign, over to you.
Thank you very much. We also use your data. Okay. So I'll take off from where she stopped, and she asked a very important question. Says, with whom are they going to mobilize? Please bear that in mind for when you get to the last part of my presentation. So the African Peace and Security Architecture is a framework to respond to all these conflicts, this data you are seeing. That's why it was set up. And it was historically in response to the deficits from its predecessor, the Organization of the African Union, for which we now have the African Union. And so at the start of it, if you read the African Union PSA protocol, the Peace and Security Council protocol, that's where the whole architecture takes its essence from. And the expectation is that we move from early warning data, have the early warning analysis or report from think tanks, institutions, even experts within the African Union or the regional economic communities like ECOWAS or IGAD or EAC. And then the expectation is to have early action. That's the expectation. Unfortunately, that is not so. We have early warning data. We have early warning analysis and report. Quite a number of coups on the continent, especially in the Sahel, for example, were predicted before they happened. The decline in the situation in Mali was foreseen. The Arab Spring, the Libya case, was foreseen. Quite a number of instances in the Horn of Africa were foreseen, but unfortunately, because there was no early action, we are where we are today. Now, what's the point of foresight if all we have is knowledge and there is no intervention before violence? That is a principal question, and I checked UCDP's data over a couple of years, and that's what it says. Conflicts have been increasing, which is a testament to the incredible failure of conflict prevention. Not because there is no early warning data, not because we don't have the right expertise, not because we don't have the framework, the legal, normative, political framework, but simply because there is no early action. Now, why don't we have early action? To reduce these numbers or prevent them in the first place, the numbers ACLED is showing us. There's an imbalance in the scale, and from my view, I summarized it into three things. First is it's significantly political, and that's the verticality, the excess verticality between the African Union and its member states. How do the AU see its member states? How do the member states respond to early warnings? It's a huge issue back in Addis, and so far it's more of a question we are still asking. We don't have answers to, right? And the setup of the African Union is such that things can't really move forward when it comes to intervention without the member states. There is also the communication issue. When the African Union or any of the institutions or even research institutions are talking about early warning, what do the member states hear? When we say a conflict might break out in this particular region and it's focused on citizen security, what do they hear? How do they respond? When it's focused on a threat to the regime, what do they hear and how do they respond? There's a huge gap in communication. I don't have the answer to how to solve that, but I think there's a need to interrogate that aspect. And the last part is capacity. Do existing institutions have the continent-wide capacity to respond to the volume of early warning data that they receive? This is where think tanks come in, and first is a reference, The Logic of Feeding and Starvation is a reference to a book chapter I did on silencing the gods last year. And the second one has to do with a work from IPSS. The first one is looking at it, from a holistic view in terms of the structure, systems, and cycles of violence that continue to recycle. If you check most conflicts on the continent, they are often unresolved issues, not necessarily new conflicts. And so the logic behind it is what's feeding them. If they feed, they can starve. What can we do to starve these structure, systems, and cycles of violence? The other aspect from our work at IPSS now goes to the question of with whom. Monitoring relationship dynamics between the different actors is very key, and we often don't pay attention to it. It's good we have the numbers, it's good we have the quantitative aspect, but the relationship between myself and Britannia, for example, at the point when we are signing the peace agreement, may not necessarily be the same 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the line when we are talking about implementing the agreement? Who is monitoring it? Quantitative data would not give us that answer. Who is monitoring that relationship? Who is monitoring, for example, what kind of trust or alliances have built up between FANO and the OLA, for example, in the region? And how soon are we responding? Because for me, the earlier you respond, the less political it is to intervene, because now you are not dealing with something that has escalated, wherein the different actors have to be accountable to their constituents. You are responding at a time where it is not too volatile to respond to. You are responding at a time where there is not so much at stake yet. So I would end with this question. How early is early action? Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And we're going to come back to that question. But perhaps first I should go to Britannia Tedeschi, who is normally in the belly of the beast of the multilateral system that's in New York at the General Assembly, but is at the moment, I believe, taking a break in Addis and has kindly joined us here. Britannia, would you like to hold forth for your 6 minutes? And then we can get into a few questions, because we discussed earlier about the health of the multilateral system, and I think gets very much to what Jesutimi was saying and what you were saying earlier about ways out of this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and really thank you for the invitation from the NATO Foundation as well. And I really consider myself privileged as well to join this panel, because I'm a avid user of Athlete data, but also a big fan of Alan's Horn podcast. So it's really great to join this panel. And I think based on the discussions we had so far, I think there is an agreement on the kind of transformation is taking place within the Horn of Africa, the geopolitical competition that we are witnessing, and how the shifting alliances within the region itself, but also what's happening across the Red Sea and more broadly globally, is really having a lasting impact in the Horn of Africa. And I think for my side, particularly the topic I was given to discuss around security cooperation, peace building, and African ownership, I think it just ties to this current circumstance, the current context of the Horn of Africa, and how do we build regional resilience in a context where security threats are becoming increasingly regionalized, interconnected, beyond the specific fragility that we're seeing in Horn states, but also this is unfolding in a context where multilateral institutions and international support mechanisms are under immense pressure. So this requires us to rethink how we respond to threats. The first thing, so when we talk about security challenges experienced in the Horn, beyond the security of course, as I mentioned, of the individual states, we are seeing increased regionalization of threats. For example, we discussed earlier about the context in Somalia, the violent extremism, terrorism, the long fight against al-Shabaab, but also that has repercussion to the security of neighboring countries, and also some of these threats, whether in Sudan, the ongoing war in Sudan, we have cross-border movements, again, of people, of arms, but also of illicit networks. So while while threats are becoming increasingly interconnected, our responses remain very fragmented, very state-centric. Peace efforts really tend to focus on national political settlements and really overlooking the cross-border dynamics that really continue to sustain violence. And the second point, perhaps I would like to highlight, is that, of course, beyond military threats, what is taking place in the Horn of Africa, I think it's very important. It would be very important to also make a connection with other non-military types of threats, particularly the impacts of climate change, which is not necessarily new to the Horn of Africa, but really how it's becoming a threat multiplier by interfacing with existing conflict dynamics in the region. And again, of course, climate change does not necessarily create conflicts, but really on its own in isolation. But really, it's become more severe in context where there is weak governance and communities are unable to adapt. Of course, when it comes to the African Union response to this particular challenge, climate, peace and security, I think there is much more policies coming out from the African Union in terms of even forming or in terms of creating a common position on climate, peace and security. The Peace and Security Council has been also being quite vocal on the nexus between climate and peace and security, but we don't necessarily see the same policy language, for example, in the UN Security Council. But there is consensus within the continent. And when we talk about, again, African ownership, I think it was very interesting to hear in the first panel, where we discussed about the role of civil society organizations, that when we talk about African ownership, of course, the first thing that comes to mind mostly is the African Union, African states, or IGAD. But there is a wide range of, the civic space, civil society organizations that are really the shapers and the leaders in terms of building peace builders in their own communities. And we have also seen the example of Sudan, particularly on this, but also on the humanitarian front, the role of mutual aid groups, emergency response rooms that are operating in very volatile contexts, particularly in contexts where international humanitarian systems are unable to access. And maybe I would like to conclude with 3 points based on these reflections, particularly on the discussion on security approaches. We discussed about counterterrorism, violent extremism, the recent developments around the support to the African Union mission in Somalia, the role of the UN, which has been a long-standing partner of the African Union mission in Somalia, but with very dwindling financial support to UN peace support operations, but also affecting African-led peace operations. The security arrangement currently in Somalia is under severe financial pressure, but also it's not purely, of course, financial. It's a very political decision that has been taken. So this also allows us to maybe, we as in the international community really now can also explore other kind of support approaches beyond the military support. And the second point around, again, peace building, how it needs to be anchored in, in the regional dimension of peace building, going beyond actually the national borders, because that's where threats are also, they also are, we have the spillover effects from one crisis to another, so our responses also need to adapt to that. And finally, the climate change part, the impacts of climate, and also making that part of the peace building efforts within the Horn of Africa. So I would conclude with that, but happy to engage more.
Thanks. Thanks. A couple of quick questions, just because you made the reference to the Somalia situation, and that's, for those of you who are not following this on a day-to-day basis, the United States government said on the 1st of July it was going to end funding next year for the OSOM operation, which does the basic logistics for the UN operation on the ground in Somalia, which effectively strands those soldiers, who's peacekeeping soldiers on the ground in Somalia, at a time when it was said earlier that the Somali government is already in a lot of trouble vis-à-vis its component parts, Puntland and so forth. I just wondered how you feel about the repercussions of that, and whether you see any hope, either coming from the European Union, which is an alternative source of funds, but hasn't exactly rushed forward with an open checkbook, or alternative funding for this if the US is pulling out. And you mentioned the political dimension to this. Is it because the president has some sort of animosity towards the Somali community in the US? Could that be connected?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily see it from that angle.
Okay.
I don't think, I absolutely do not believe that's the case. But I think this decision, it's not surprising because there has been a clear trend on how not only the US, but also how the international community has been engaging with the current security mechanism in the African, of the African Union in Somalia. So even before, like if we just provide a bit of context, where we are at the moment, around in December 2023, for example, there was a landmark resolution that was adopted in the UN Security Council, which is famously called Resolution 2719, which really allows assessed contribution from the UN to be provided on a case-by-case basis to African-led peace support operations. The African Union utilized that momentum to trigger that resolution to be utilized in the context of the AU mission in Somalia, which was, of course, opposed by the US, and the US also presented its own explanation for why they were not supportive of that. They also, particularly one line of argument was that 2719 is a new resolution and they want that resolution to be applied in a completely new mission than an existing one. But of course, that's not the position of the African Union, which has been really eager to secure sustainable funding for its mission in Somalia. But for the most part, I think many of the European Council members were supportive of 2719, particularly including being used in the case of Somalia. But that, of course, did not materialize. And now, in addition to that, the UN mission that is supporting, that is providing logistical backstopping to the AU mission in Somalia now, that will also be somehow, that will not be getting any kind of support from the US, so that means that mission also has to end soon. That is also another complicating factor, in addition to the financial challenges the AU mission itself is facing now. Its logistical support will be absent in Somalia. So it's both affecting the AU itself, but also its supportive partner, the UN mission in Somalia.
Just a quick follow-up from that before I go to Alan. The US has had a sort of military campaign against militants from Daesh, Islamic State, but not against al-Shabaab in Somalia. Because in the past it has launched attacks. Have those ended? I mean, what's the position? If they're saying that they're not going to support a peacekeeping mission in Somalia, because as far as they're concerned, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed's government hasn't been able to translate all that US help into battlefield consolidation, but they're still willing to zap Islamic State militants. Is that where we are at the moment with the attitude? That we don't want to get involved on the ground, but we'll do some long-distance stuff if we choose to?
Well, so far, I mean, of course, the bilateral engagement, the US bilateral engagement on Somalia has really continued in terms of the counterterrorism targeted kind of attacks, and that's the military support has continued. But and also to be clear, the US position is also that the renewal of AUSOM, for example, will continue. They will not oppose that, but they don't want in that resolution for ANSOS to be mentioned in that resolution, or for the continuation of ANSOS.
And they're blocking funding. They're blocking $170 million of funding.
Specifically on the ANSOS. But for example, if the African Union is also funding AUSOM, I don't think that's necessarily, I mean, it's self-financing by the African Union, so I think that would be supported. But I think the main challenges on AU accessing UN-assessed contribution. That I think that's the sticking point. Yeah.
That's a vulnerability. Thanks. Alan, sorry for banging on about this. I just thought it was interesting because it's a sort of breaking story. Can I hand the floor to you for your regional prognostications?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alan Boswell. I'm the Horn of Africa Director with International Crisis Group. We're a global organization, for those who don't know, who work on preventing conflict when it hasn't broken out and trying to resolve it when it has, and when that's impossible, trying to mitigate it and contain it. And we do that. Our methodology is very much our primary interviews, talking to those fighting, talking to those involved from the outside in the fighting, and talking to those who are trying to end it. I'm in the position of being your last panelist, I think, so also a lot has been said, and regrettably I'm also sitting between you and Aperitivo, so I will just try to emphasize a few points on and connect some of the dots that have been said. The Horn has been mentioned, is one of the world's most fragmented and contested and frankly violent places. It is the place where we have seen Greater Sudan split up then into Sudan, South Sudan. What was Ethiopia for a bit is now Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. You have the de facto separation of Somaliland since 1991. So fragmentation that is still ongoing and remains contested. The big geopolitical trend, I think, of the last 10 years especially, I would put in two buckets, although they're connected. One is that the Horn of Africa, as you're increasingly hearing, is increasingly part of the Middle East arena and sphere, and I think this distinction, which came perhaps in the Cold War and after Cold War, of Africa vis-a-vis the Middle East and North Africa, or Horn of Africa being separate from the Arabian Peninsula, these geographic distinctions, which are ahistorical in a large respect, it doesn't really correspond to how the communities themselves in terms of linguistics and history and ethnicities are actually very quite mingled, but those distinctions are breaking down very much, and we're seeing that in real time in the geopolitics. And that also, in the Horn of Africa, really just geographically is where the Sahel sort of runs into the Red Sea and into the Arabian Peninsula, where the Horn of Africa goes up into North Africa and the Mediterranean. And we're really seeing that with the implosion of Sudan in this current war, where all these regions are more or less colliding into this really terrible war. The second connected one there is that we have seen the U.S. Increasingly its role decline in the region. It is still a huge player in the region, but we've seen it pull back over successive administrations in terms of influence, both willingly and unwillingly. In that space, what we've not seen is one major actor come in and kind of fill the void. What we've seen is many actors come in and start to fill that, and some pushing the U.S. out, some coming in sense because the U.S. has left the space. So it's created this very, I'd say, unique contested space in the world, one in which actually the regional middle powers, you could argue, are outpunching any of the superpowers. And I think that does make it interesting and unique in the broader sense, and it's on this very strategic Red Sea coastline. So we are very worried at the moment, not only about all the internal situations that have been discussed by all the previous panelists. You have the terrible war in Sudan, which has now become a regional war, an escalating regional war. You have the situation in Ethiopia, where you have a new standoff in Tigray, as well as the standoff between Ethiopia and Eritrea more generally, also related to Ethiopia's quest for sea access, as came up in the first panel especially, and Somalia with a host of challenges, some older and some more recent as well. But we are increasingly, because of how these conflicts are getting intertwined now with some of these larger, greater regional, special Middle East dynamics, we're seeing also these long-standing faults in the Horn become regionalized and interconnected increasingly. So one really big trend that I think will be hard to reverse is the way the war in Sudan has become regionalized. We are seeing middle powers sucked into this region and going into this region in a way that will be very difficult now to reverse, not only in terms of arms, but in terms of diplomatic investment and other capital. And we're now seeing that those coalitions in Sudan, those backing the army versus those backing the RSF, increasingly those coalitions are now overlapping with these other crises. And so in some ways, you have very old fault lines in the Horn, but in another way, I've been trying to think of a good analogy. It's like what we're seeing now is something like a wildfire risk, where now if you start a spark somewhere, because this has all gotten so interconnected, it can spread very rapidly in a way that I think was difficult before. So to give an example that already happened, we saw in December a major new offensive in Yemen along the Saudi Arabia border that in our estimation was actually very much linked and a spillover from the regional tensions in the war in Sudan, crossing the Red Sea, going over to Yemen. Now, a major concern of us right now is if we do see renewed conflict in Tigray, which has been mentioned, is a possibility. During the last war, it was obviously very, very brutal. An estimated hundreds of thousands died, but it was, you could argue, contained in a way. We think a new war there would be almost impossible to contain. I had one regional official tell me if we see a new war in Tigray, we'll probably be looking at a belt of interconnected conflict stretching from Yemen in the east to Chad in the west. And frankly, that sounds alarmist, and it is, but it's not something that would take several dominoes to fall. It would probably happen very quickly if just that one domino fell. So I will leave it at that. And thanks, Patrick. Yeah.
Tremendous. Thanks very much, Alan. Can I just ask you a couple of provocative discussions for the final leg of this thing? First of all, it's been mentioned, you know, the Gulf states, the middle powers, particularly Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, their growing interest. What to all of us, and you spend a lot of time talking to their diplomats, what is driving their interest? Now, is it just, I mean, people talk about the fact that neither of those countries can grow any food, so they're desperately keen to get into Africa, grab areas of arable land, put their agribusiness companies down and grow food in Africa, which sounds like it almost could be positive, but it's turned out to be incredibly negative the way they've gone in there. They're looking for mineral assets. They both are trying to develop artificial intelligence at warp speed. They need those mineral assets too. What's the other dimension? Is it just a proxy competition now between the two of them? And finally, sort of linked to this, we are seeing the most alarming signals of another absolutely awful humanitarian explosion in el-Mandeb. And the principal actor here, without exonerating what the SAF, the Sudan Armed Forces, has done across the country, the principal actor here is the Rapid Support Forces, which everybody knows, despite the serial denials from Abu Dhabi, that Abu Dhabi has paid, has munitioned, and is supporting them. Do the diplomats of the United Arab Emirates ever wonder about their reputation, that at some point people will turn around and say, you are beyond the pale. You cannot go on supporting this level of conflict in the Horn of Africa. Is there a breaking point, do you think?
Well, so I think it's important. I think there's a few answers to your general question of what's driving it. And I think some of the more simplistic answers, which is it's just purely about resources in terms of making money now. I think the numbers don't, frankly, they don't add up. Something important to remember is that Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we are now talking about as being in a competitive posture with each other across much of the region, were only a few years ago quite aligned on the Horn of Africa. And of course, we saw a different alignment in the Gulf countries, and in both Saudi and UAE worked to counter Qatar, Turkey, others as well. So just say these dynamics are quite fluid. They're so fluid, in fact, that I think one of the major risks is that for the local and national actors on the African side, it can be difficult to keep full track, to see the full picture, and that makes the risks of miscalculation quite high as well. But I think more generally, one thing that we're seeing that these countries, a country like Saudi Arabia, sits on the Red Sea, directly across. Jeddah is directly across from Port Sudan, separated by a very thin amount. The Saudis consider Sudan a neighbor. For them, it's not a region they can ignore. The UAE, you could argue, is more buffered, but again, in its vision, it sees this as a part of its bigger near abroad. And many of these increasing investments started taking place a while ago. The UAE started investing heavily in ports, especially. I think one thing we've seen historically is that when countries, when we see investments happen in a region on a large scale, usually political and often security interventions follow that intervention. I don't need to probably lay out the various times in history we've seen that. And so I think some of this has just been a natural, the money comes for various reasons, economic development or geostrategic development, and then the political and security interest to protect those investments, to increase your influence, grow. But then the other thing I'll point out then is this is in the context of these actors becoming increasingly convinced that they have to shape their own region because the overall security umbrella and order, I dropped my pen, is falling apart. And then I have a friend who describes Sudan as essentially the dark side of multipolarity, meaning this is when you have so many actors who are pursuing their own interests that, sure, sometimes they overlap and there is complementary, but other times they do not overlap. And if there's not the culture yet of making sure to coordinate and prevent this from completely spilling over, then you have a situation like Sudan where you have some players taking one position, one main player taking the opposite position, and instead of sitting down and saying this will produce an escalating war with no end, we instead see everyone doubling down. So I think there are structural reasons, but it's basically a competition within what they see as the near abroad, and I think it's been building for a while.
Just with respect to our hosts, that is, Italy and the wider European Union, we've managed to have discussion about for 2 or 3 hours about the Horn of Africa. I don't think there has been any substantive reference at all to what the European Union could do, should do, and is doing. Beyond, I think, regarding the Red Sea as a sort of maritime channel. Any idea why that is? Is the European Union complicit in its own geostrategic irrelevance in the Horn of Africa?
Well, I feel like it did come up in the first panel quite significantly, but I'll say in fairness to our hosts that not only, the EU I think is very active diplomatically and is among those who have invested the most actually in working across the Red Sea. Luca and Annette Weber, the EU SR, they spend a lot of time not just in the Horn but in the broader region, and Italy is also very active within the Horn as a member state as well. So there is that. I think, frankly, this is a very fluid time, and I think there's been a lot of investments and hope, for instance, on multilateral institutions, such as the African Union, that have not really borne fruit, such as IGAD, which are not really borne fruit. That's not to put blame on them. Multilateral organizations, such as the United Nations, on many fronts, are struggling, but I think there's this era. A crisis group just put out a report in the past few days saying we're entering a new era of hard power. It's obvious in a sense, but I think that then also confronts us on how we stop and end and resolve conflicts, right? Where we would like it to happen a certain way through certain institutions. Increasingly, we're seeing, as was mentioned, increasingly ad hoc coalitions built on sort of hard power leverage, and I think this is a time when a lot are still positioned, trying to figure out how to navigate that space. Frankly,
thanks very much for the correction, Bilal. I think with respect to time and looming aperitivos, I should perhaps ask people for their final remarks. Bilal, can I go to you first in terms of your early warning, and you mentioned very much about what might happen in Ethiopia and Sudan and Somalia. Are there any, from your information, your conflict data, are there any positives you could cite? Any positive developments, projections about the region that you think offer some hope in terms of alignments and new forces coming into play?
Yes, of course. We also collect information on strategical developments. For example, since we are talking about African solutions, we also have, our data also shows that the elders in Somalia are very much trying to resolve the dispute between the federal government and the opposition group. So that they will have a consensus on a way forward for the election. That's a positive thing to keep an eye on. Most of the time, if you know the culture or the political environment in Somalia, the elders have a big influence in the political arena. So they have the potential to mitigate this difference and avoid any further violence because of the election. Another positive, as an example, positive development is that if I'm going to go very deep, Between the border between Ethiopia and Kenya, there's a Turkana Lake. The communities there, they usually fight, and there's a violence. And last week there was a meeting between the elders of different ethnic groups across the border, and they have agreed in some substantive issues that might resolve the conflict for some time or for a very long time. So there are such developments. When we see the bigger picture, for example, the tension within Tigray, which might bring in different regional actors, there are some signs, but I'm not sure whether that's positive or negative. We are keeping an eye on that. The same is true for Sudan. If the Quad group or others manage to put the two actors into the negotiation table, that's a positive outcome. The same is true for the German government from Berlin and so on. So there are different developments like this, positive developments, which could change our predictions. So we are keeping an eye on that.
Thanks very much. Jesutimi, can I turn to you for your final remarks and slivers of optimism or positivity or brutal realism, if you prefer?
I think my view is that there are a lot of positives, but we should not make a mistake we've made over the last 2 decades, where we get so positive and we ignore the reality. The positive is that more and more countries are beginning to, on the continent, are beginning to see the reason for cooperation, even though they don't show it openly. More countries are beginning to see the reason why they need to develop their citizens, see the need for more private sector investment. Even the African Union recently announced the amount of money that, like the Dangote Group, for example, puts into the African Union Peace Fund. They are all positives, but we must not lose sight of the fact that the way the world is, quite a number of states are looking into the critical minerals Africa holds. Now, whether these actors would come in and play a positive role while they benefit from those minerals, or they will come in a more, what I say, disruptive role, like we are seeing in Sudan, that's yet to be seen. So for me, I think in engaging different institutions with, the continent as a whole, the AU itself, the member states have to go back to the drawing board to do a proper analysis of each actor. What are their priorities? What are their methods? What do they want, for example? At the time when Italy came up with the Mattei plan, most countries were not particularly expecting that they will come up with such a plan at the time. Right. That was good, and I'm hoping that 8 member states will take advantage of it. But at the same time, we also did not predict the foreign policy change from the United States in the rapid way it has gone, and clearly many member states are being caught unawares. The AU is being caught unawares. So for me, yes, there are positives, but we also must not lose sight of I wouldn't call it negatives. I would say possible setbacks that might happen. And in this case, preparedness, responsiveness is very important, and that would require a significant amount of improved coordination between and amongst the AU member states. Because at the end of the day, the EU might come to support, China might come to support, the US might come to support, but the buck stops at the table of the member states. If they don't make decisive decisions that are responsive to the situation at hand, we'll be back in the next 10 years discussing the same issue. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Britannia, final remarks. You spend most of your time, I think, in New York. This year, the UN Secretary General's job is up for election. Quite a lot of women have put their hat in the ring, or their berets in the ring. And in fact, former president of Senegal at one stage did too. What's your sense of how this election is going and what it will mean for peacekeeping and the UN's ability to try to rebuild or restore, reform multilateralism?
Yeah, that's
it's a big question for
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And
just your sense.
Yes. So also it kind of also captures the current attention and debates that we are really seeing in New York, but also I think more beyond New York in terms of a very interesting theme that I think that emerged among the many candidates, among the 6 candidates that are now in the race, is the role of UN's peacemaking role, which has been missing for quite some time. And that's also something that we've been discussing, of course, at length on what is the role of multilateral organizations in terms of mediation, in terms of peacemaking, because increasingly the mediation landscape is crowded, but also is being occupied by different other actors. It can be also member state-led, rather than multilateral institutions anchored in values, shared values and principles. So there is a lot of expectation on the next Secretary General. Globally, not just like within the New York space, but also I think it's important, of course, to manage expectations around what do we exactly expect from a new leadership from the UN, but also the gender aspect. I think we're all we're all supporting for the first women SG for the UN. I mean, the African Union has done it. We had an African Union chairperson who did a remarkable job within the African Union. So we're just hoping we will have the same for the UN as well.
You don't expect a late African woman entry into the race?
Well, there
that's
are
still
rumors.
possible? There is the Assistant Secretary General.
There are rumors, I mean, but of course, they're not confirmed at this point. But yeah, we have a very excellent candidates.
Okay, right, thanks. Alan, you've told us what is going wrong quite a lot in the region, all of it very well sourced and evidenced. What could go right in the next year, do you think? What would you look at in terms of some of this conflict could be tamped down? It seems we could see ceasefires, we could see access to humanitarian organizations. Where would you look to see any positivities?
Sometimes escalation is what it takes to reach de-escalation.
Right.
I suppose.
Right.
So that's a sort of negative way of framing a potential positive.
Right.
But I honestly think the situation in the Horn of Africa is the way it's the risk of very large fragmentation and the regionalization is also such that I would hope that actors will increasingly see the risk of accidentally lighting another spark or intentionally doing so, and how difficult that will be to contain, not only in the Horn, but as we saw in Yemen, also the way it can even spread outside the Horn too.
The blowback is a sort of caution.
Yeah, I think the region is becoming explosive, frankly, and I think there's starting, even though the temperature is very high, there's also an understanding among some, perhaps not all, that the temperature is raising high. So I think, one, we need to generally there needs to be a turning down of the temperature. There's some long-standing rivalries, such as between Egypt and Ethiopia, that are not going to be resolved in the next, few years, but it might be wise to maybe, tone it down right now so that it doesn't blow up in a way that hurts both. You could say the same about rivalries in the Gulf, etc. I think it'll be very hard to generally tamp a lot of this down until we see something on the war in Sudan that de-escalates. I'm not going to say we're close to that. We saw that the probability was low for successful negotiations, but I do think at some point, frankly, it has to happen. But but I also want to say that there are. We talked about the external actors. The regional actors have the ultimate agency, as is often said and is true, within the region. And someone like Prime Minister Abiy can choose, as he's done thus far, for instance, not to jump into a new war in Tigray, can work on trying to not allow a continued escalation between him and the Sudanese army, which has been happening. So there is the power to halt this within the region as well if they want to. So that's where the hope lies, and we'll see some of that. I think the likelihood of seeing the grand doomsday scenario is hopefully not very high, because there is a lot of incentive, frankly, for it not to. But only because of that.
Thanks very much. Bit of brutal realism there. Thank you. Please, your appreciation for a wonderful panel and their contribution to the Horn. Thank you.
So now it is my great pleasure for the concluding remarks to introduce to you Mrs. Nicoletta Bombardiere. She is the Director General for Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Oceania of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation. Madam, the podium is yours.
Well, first of all, good evening to everyone. Now, the task of closing a discussion is almost a mission impossible, and more especially after today's discussion, which I understand has been very rich and articulated. So, of course, I have no ambition to draw conclusions, but rather to highlight some threats from the perspective, from the point of view of the Italian foreign policy in the region. And I think threats that have been running through today's discussion. But before doing this, let me thank warmly my colleague, Ambassador Minutorizzo, for inviting me to today's event and for keeping this focus on a region which is really a strategic one. Now, the Horn of Africa is not a distant concern because it sits really on the axis that runs from the Mediterranean through the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, an axis along which increasingly European security and prosperity are also decided. So if I have to see one single thread running through today's discussion, is that the security of the Horn and of the supply lines that pass through it is a political question as much as or more than a military one. Security and naval presence matters as it addresses the symptoms, but the conditions for a lasting stability are found onshore, in governance, in the resilience of states, in the legitimacy of institutions, the improvement of which has been traditionally and still is a key commitment of the Italian government in Africa in general and in the Horn region more specifically. A narrow strait, the Bab el-Mandeb, carries a crucial share of world trade and of Europe's energy. We are passing, moreover, through a peculiar moment in which pressure on the Red Sea coincides with renewed tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, so that the two passages framing the Arabian Peninsula are under strain at once. The conclusion might be obvious, but worthy to be highlighted. Freedom of navigation rests on political conditions along the coastlines that command these waters. For that reason, the Horn cannot be considered apart from the Gulf, as highlighted also by the implementation of the Mattei Plan, our main partnership framework with the African continent, which is increasingly open to strategic cooperation with regional actors. The states of the Arabian Peninsula have tied their security and their economies to these waters through ports, bases, and investments along the African shore. Their interests and ours converge on one essential point, that the sea lanes remain open, and there is room here for effective dialogue between Europe, the Gulf, and the African states. Another consideration is related to malign influence and hybrid threats. Where legitimate partners are absent, others are not, and what occupies is the space, armed groups, illicit economies, external actors, rarely serve the populations concerned. To this, we must also add the more corrosive instrument of our time, disinformation, manipulation of grievance, deliberate cultivation of instability. For certain actors, instability is not a problem to be resolved, but an objective in itself, since a region kept unsettled weakens us at little cost to them. No situation illustrates this more gravely than Sudan, the largest displacement crisis in the world, a conflict neither party can win. Sudan deserves a central place in any serious treatment of this region, as exemplified by Italy's increased commitment in this crisis. And here, we need to support more staunchly an African-led settlement and less interference from external actors. The work of the African Union and of IGAD should not be seen as auxiliary to our own. Increasingly, it should be the principal effort, and our task is to support it. And this requires also a clear division of labor among NATO, the European Union, the African Union, and IGAD, but with one fundamental strategic perspective. We need to act before crisis rather than after them. Preventive diplomacy and strategic foresight are quite simply the least costly instrument we hold, because prevention always is. Ethiopia features prominently, and understandably so. It is a demographic, and economic anchor of the Horn, and its stability is strategic for the region. Italy stands more and more as a key partner for Addis Ababa, and Ethiopia stands as a partner of a vast and ambitious array of Piano Mattei projects, and the main recipients of our development cooperation funds in all of Africa south of the Sahara. Somalia and Eritrea also complete this picture, each through the lens of a distinct bilateral dialogue cultivated by Italy. With Mogadishu, our engagement remains close and multifaceted, including support to institutional consolidation and to the fight against al-Shabaab, a reminder that terrorism continues to represent one of the most direct threats to regional stability. With Asmara, we maintain a channel of cooperation and dialogue that we consider valuable to progressively contribute to a more integrated and inclusive Horn. Overall, and remembering the tensions and the risk of fragmentation in the region, what is needed is a peaceful and negotiated settlement of the different aspirations and concerns in full respect for the sovereignty of all states concerned. A Horn connected by shared corridors, energy links, and cross-border value chains generates its own resilience and can contribute to the perspective of an African continental free trade area. Connectivity creates stability. But stability is also built within existing borders and by strengthening institutions, governance, the resilience of societies, prospects for the youth and human capital investments and economic development. Italy regards the Horn as part of an enlarged Mediterranean, of which the Red Sea is a natural extension. I already mentioned Piano Mattei as our principal instrument of policy in the African continent. Its premise is straightforward. The development and security advance together rather than in sequence. Partnerships are built with our partners, not for them. And then we should listen at least as much as we propose. We see it not as an alternative to Europe's efforts, but as a contribution to it, complementary to the European gateway and to the work of the African and international financial institutions. Furthermore, it offers synergic opportunities to NATO's wider southern neighborhood strategy. The supply lines we have discussed are a matter of trust as much as of capability, secured not only by military assets, but more by our diplomatic presence and political engagement in the region. The Horn of Africa is a neighborhood we share and the measure of our collective ability to anticipate events rather than merely respond to them. And with these words, I once again thank the Foundation for the privilege of these closing words. And I really appreciate the time you have spent on these very inspiring and crucial issues for our collective stability. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Nicoletta, for giving us the big picture at the end of a day, of a very compressed day, because, you know, to be sincere with the public, you know, as it was a very hot day in the middle of July, we thought that we should start the later possible. You know, usually we don't start at 4:30 in the afternoon our conference. This time we made an exception, but I think it's worth doing that because I don't know. I have learned a lot of things on the Horn of Africa. In part, I had forgotten them, and in part, I was not up to date with the reality. So I thank all the speakers and all the people who came here today because they really gave us a, how can I say, a kind of entertainment that we enjoyed. We liked very much. So thank you all. And thank you also to the public, because in Rome, to have people sitting for hours and ending at 8 o'clock in the evening in July is a sign that you are liking the conference. So grazie mille a tutti, grazie per essere qui e grazie anche al Ministero degli Esteri che ci ha aiutato a fare questa conferenza. Buonasera.